out with my rant today from HartmannReport.com. Why would anybody embrace fascism? And, you know, I realize that there have been historically, not historically, but, you know, over the last couple of decades, there have been basically kind of two camps about what's animating the hard right. What's animating the Republican Party? What's animating the GOP's base? And one camp argues that they're just all racists. You know, this is the leftover of Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan's Southern strategy, combined with, you know, George Herbert Walker Bush's Willie Horton ad, and then Donald Trump, the Mexican rapists are coming, and asshole countries, and keep out the Muslims with his Muslim ban, and all that stuff is added up to just this massive flow of racism. That said, I remember a time when, you know, I mean, growing up in lower middle class Lansing, where, you know, all the white people that I knew had good jobs. They were working at Fisher Body or General Motors. They were making cars. They were making, you know, good money, $30 an hour, which was a lot back then. They had good benefits. And yeah, they were probably mostly racists, but they weren't voting for racists. They weren't, you know, carrying around Confederate flags. They weren't strapping AR-15s to their chest and strutting around like street gangs, you know, threatening people's lives. What's the difference? What happened? What brought the racists out of the woodwork? And in this article, basically, I lay out this hypothesis, which, you know, I've shared with you in the past, but I think, you know, it's worth revisiting from time to time. That what is, you know, in fact, all over social media, people are asking, why would anybody embrace fascism? I mean, because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about fascism. There's this worldwide movement toward fascism. Rachel Maddow opened her show with it last night on MSNBC, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I watched it on the plane from Salt Lake City here. We had a stopover. And I think it's safety. You know, on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the very bottom, of course, is homeostasis. You need to breathe, you need to drink water, you need to, you know, be able to do bodily functions, basically, maintain your body temperature, stuff like that. But right above that is safety. You know, if you're crossing a street and all of a sudden cars are whizzing by you in both directions, you're not thinking about, you know, what you're going to have for dinner or what you want to do with your career goals or you know, whether you should propose to that to your new girlfriend or what. I mean, what you're thinking about is, how do I avoid getting hit by a car? And what has happened over the last 40 years as part of the Reagan Revolution and in response to the Powell memo, Lewis Powell's memo, is that there has been this huge right-wing infrastructure built, and I would call it a neo-fascist infrastructure, frankly, because they're all promoting fascism. Not necessarily pure Nazism, but something damn close. And, you know, that includes 1,500 right-wing radio stations, that includes, I mean, if you look at the top podcasts, the top 100 podcasts, like the top 40 of them, at least 2/3 of them are right-wing podcasts. There's enormous money behind these. They promote them like crazy. They on social media, they get promotion. You've also got, you know, the owners and people running many of the social media sites are themselves billionaires and conservatives, and so they're pushing these memes as well. And so now what you have is kind of latent racism that has had a fire lit under it by the destruction of the American middle class. We've gone, and largely the white middle class, although since the 60s there was a growing black middle class and a Hispanic middle class as well. And all have taken a hit. The blacks and Hispanics have been hit harder than the whites, but the whites have been hit hard enough that, you know, the middle class in America has gone from 65% of us when Reagan came into office to 45% of us today. So you've got, you know, that 20% that got screwed, you know, the title of one of my books, The Undeclared War on the Middle Class. And these people who have literally, not literally been screwed if you use the you know, some of the definitions, but I'd say, you know, financially they've been screwed. And, you know, they know it, they're just not sure why. And so you've got this huge media structure around the country that, you know, that kind of started with Limbaugh on radio. It started with Rupert Murdoch, the Australian billionaire, on television. that have a very simple answer for these largely white people who have been financially screwed by 40 years of Reaganism. They're saying, okay, who did this to me? Why does my job pay half of what I paid in 1980? And the answer these people will say is, oh, it's because black people want your job. It's because brown-skinned immigrants want your job. It's because women want your job. And if we could just go back to, pre-1965, when women had to have a man's permission to get a credit card or open a checking account, when women generally could not enter the workforce unless it was a secretary, when black people were relegated to very specific jobs, janitors and things like that, and by and large separated from the rest of society. We had segregated water fountains. We still had segregated schools. If we could just go back to that, society would stabilize itself. This was Russell Kirk's great theory. He wrote a book about this called The Conservative Mind, From Burke to Eliot. And it starts out with Edmund Burke. And Edmund Burke was the famous British conservative philosopher, political economist back in the late 1700s, who wrote that, it does me no harm if a man is allowed to engage in a profession as servile as that of hairdresser or candlemaker, but it does society considerable violence if such a man is allowed to vote. I'm slightly paraphrasing, but that's pretty close to the exact quote. And this perspective has been adopted by the Republican Party. And now they've reached the logical end of this. They're actually openly, nakedly, enthusiastically promoting fascism in the United States. And they've got this whole network of right-wing billionaires behind them that are also pushing fascism in this country. And they've also got, all these radio stations and podcasts and everything. Interesting, I believe it was the Brennan Center did this study. It was published last week. I mentioned this briefly on Friday, that some of these right-wing podcasts are 11 times more likely to have lies in them than our left-wing podcasts. 11 times. That's 11,000%, right? Or 1,100% more lies. And, you wonder why people are acting crazy. You wonder why people are so angry. You wonder why people have gone so nuts. Simple answer is they're being lied to. They're being told that they are not safe. Now, they know financially they're not safe, but they're being told that lack of safety is the result of Democrats, of liberals, of queer people, of black people, and of women. And therefore, they need to go after those people. And thus, we've got all these white guys strutting around with AR-15s strapped across their chests, wearing Confederate flags. Surprise, surprise. What do you think?
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at report.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcast normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show.
Book report today, or book club today, is Cuban Women Confront the Future. It's an interview with Vilma Espin. Vilma Espin was the president of the Federation of Cuban Women since its founding in 1960, and was the chair of the Commission for Social Prevention and president of the Infancy Institute and the International Federation of Democratic Women. And it's a long-form interview, actually, the book. So the first question, what does socialism mean in the lives of a Cuban family, and in particular, Cuban woman? Vilma Espin. For the Cuban family, especially the woman, socialism has meant an enormous improvement to the quality of life and personal development. We should remember that until January 1st, 1959, in our country, hunger, poverty, exploitation, repression, and dependence reigned. The revolution opened up new horizons in the economic, political, and social fields, and amongst its key principles is the defense of equal rights for all human beings. The constant struggle to make ends meet disappeared, and with it the antagonism between people competing for the crumbs that could help them escape the tragic destiny that awaited the majority. Thus the family, the basic cell of society, could develop in a rounded way. Our revolution assured all Cubans the chance to exercise each one of their inalienable rights. Each citizen is assured that food prices are reasonable and that education and medical services are free. The state makes a systemic effort to improve living standards to the extent that it is permitted by the tense battle for development that we wage under blockade and constant imperialist threats. Child care facilities have been created to provide care for the children of tens of thousands of working women from the age of 3 months to 6 years. Services to lighten domestic work have been created. Hundreds of thousands of students have also received free lunch at day school and all their meals at boarding school. Hundreds of thousands of workers also receive their meals at a moderate price in their workplace. More industrial laundries and dry cleaners have been established, and more domestic labor-saving devices are available with preference in acquisition and cheaper prices for workers. Huge resources are dedicated to housing construction in urban and rural zones. We also try to guarantee recreational facilities and spiritual enjoyment to all the population. Of course, the possibilities are exciting, but also what we have achieved to date, considering our limitations, is already vastly superior to what families experienced in the past. Social Security provides an income for those who cannot work. As far as women are concerned, equal rights have certainly changed their position in the family and in society. A woman's participation in social production, because it implies her financial independence, has altered her dependent position in the marriage and allowed a change in her ideas, in the way she looks at life. The laws that govern family relations, such as the Family Code, are based on equality and guarantee the right of members of the family to participate in society, to work, study, and to responsibly educate the children in line with our revolutionary principles. This does not mean that we achieved all that we aspire to. We still have problems of a material nature to resolve, which are directly related to our economic development. There is still the need to eliminate backward ideas that some people hold, men and women, with respect to the role that each person should play within the home, the nature of the socialist family and the relationship between a couple, ideas which work against the full participation of women in the building of a new society. Obviously, the economic security guaranteed by both men and women having access to work, free health care, and education, the obvious satisfaction and confidence in oneself that equal opportunity and the chance to fully develop to the extent of one's talents, intelligence, and aptitude offer to each person, the constant motivation and emotional stability that comes from feeling useful, recognized, and dignified as a human being. Everything that socialism has brought to us undoubtedly fulfills the deepest desires of a family, particularly the woman, who until just a quarter century ago was exploited, oppressed, and marginalized in the family and in society. Question: what is the primary concern in Cuba, work or the human being? What place do women occupy within this concern? Vilma Espin: in Cuba, a country that is building socialism, the highest aim is human happiness, based on respect for the fundamental human rights of each person. That includes full social equality to education, health care, work, and professional training, with the chance to employ all of one's faculties to take an active role in society and to help develop that society, to create the material and spiritual basis for a full, harmonious life, where the highest qualities of both men and women flourish. To reach those aspirations requires work, talent, dedication, and willingness from everybody. It requires constant scientific and technological innovation to assure economic and social development. Thus, each member of our society, along with the right to work and all the benefits brought by the revolution, has acquired the duty to help create the economic basis necessary for such advantages. The building of a new society and the fulfillment of new aspirations could not possibly be achieved except on the basis of work and the willingness of the whole population. And the people work with enthusiasm because work is the means for creating wealth and goods for all to enjoy. Work that is free from exploitation does require a new dimension, a quality that stimulates and produces satisfaction. To feel that you are useful and are creating your destiny, to project yourselves toward the future through your work, to cultivate the future. In a speech in January 1964, Che Guevara said that when each Cuban viewed work as a vital expression of their human creativity, technology, technique, and inventions would proceed apace, and all would participate with an uncontainable force in building the new society. The book, Cuban Women Confront the Future by Vilma
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, it's Wednesday. It's a beautiful day. It's rainy, actually, here in Portland, which is kind of, it's normal. That's a beautiful day here in Portland. Oh, man, a lot going on, a lot to talk about today. Libertarianism, why Republicans embrace cruelty, like ripping mothers from their babies. Did a New York judge begin the unraveling of the Trump fantasy world? Sure seems like it. Is the Republican debate a fake? It's going to be tonight. Are you going to even watch it? Louise and I are still debating whether we're going to bother, although, I guess we have to. It's our business. Well, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. In the second hour of our program, the chair of the Federal Communications Commission has announced that starting next month, she's going to be revisiting the net neutrality debate. Ishan Mehta is going to be with us to talk about that, what that means, where that's going to go. Also, the sick racist message behind why Trump chose that particular gun store yesterday. And a Florida school district bans all library books that have queer characters, saying they cannot exist. That sounds like genocide to me. Anyway, we'll talk about that in the second hour. In the third hour, our buddy Dean Obeidallah, my colleague here on Sirius XM channel 127, is going to drop by. It's not just Trump. The Republican Party has long supported criminals. He's going to tell us all about that. Also, good news alert, major win for black voters in Alabama at the Supreme Court. One of those rare, the court did the right thing, rare these days. There's also, there's a few other things going on. For example, Republicans think they've got a new scandal to talk about Hunter Biden, and they're hoping that this can push the Donald Trump bad news and the government shutdown bad news and the screwed up Republican debate bad news off the headlines. Turns out that a couple of years ago, back about 5 years ago, Hunter Biden got a loan. Yeah, a loan. It was a loan for $250,000, if my recollection is correct. Might have been $150,000. Yeah, it was $250,000. At the time, he was living at home with his father. He was living in Joe Biden's house. And so that loan money got wired to Joe Biden's house. The loan was from a bank in China. So the Republicans are now, oh my God, a bank in China wired $250,000 to Joe Biden's house, without mentioning that this was a perfectly legal loan that was disclosed to everybody on earth. I mean, it was publicly disclosed by his son. So, but, they've got their panties in a wad about it. All right, I've decided that my house is worth $50 million. Now, I guess I can officially declare myself a multimillionaire now. I'm going to get a loan based on that because my house is now worth $50 million because I say so. And with that $50 million loan, like Donald Trump does, I'm going to live high on the hog. I will fly around in private jets. I will have chauffeurs take me everywhere. I might even buy a fancier house with that $50 million loan. Obviously, I'm tongue-in-cheek here, but that's literally what Trump did. Like Trump Towers, his apartment in Trump Towers worth like $20 million. He claimed it was worth $400 million. He just made stuff up. I mean, this is Judge Engoron said that
that he engaged in a persistent fraud. His lawyers engaged in obstreperous behavior. It was pure sophistry, what he was saying. He said it's wholly without basis in law or fact. And he said it invokes the time loop in the film Groundhog Day. One of the footnotes, footnote number 9, the judge actually quoted the Marx Brothers. That old line from Duck Soup, I think it is, where he said, "Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?" And in footnote number 10, and this is a lot more serious, and frankly, I don't think it's being given the attention or the importance that it should in the mainstream media. Donald Trump claimed that he could inflate the value of, for example, his apartment. He could say the $20 million apartment was worth $400 million because, and I quote, "A buyer from Saudi Arabia will pay any price I ask." Now, the judge noted, and he said, and I think this is probably the understatement of the decade. He said, "This statement may suggest influence buying more than savvy investing." You think? You help the Crown Prince get away with murdering a Washington Post writer? You over the objections of the Pentagon and Congress, you sell multiple weapon systems to Saudi Arabia? You elevate them to very, very high status on the world stage. They give your son-in-law $2 billion. They give your billionaire former Treasury Secretary $1 billion. They give Donald hundreds of millions, presumably. Nobody knows the amount, but the Live Golf Tour, I mean, you know, they offered Tiger Woods almost $1 billion. And they're holding them at Donald's properties. How much money is he getting for that? God only knows. But the judge has called him out. The judge has basically said, this is all about the lawsuit that Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, started. Trump always calls her a racist. He has 2 words for black people, racist and thug. That's his code for black people. And, you know, so Letitia James started this case in 2019. We are 4 years into it. She says that he inflated his net worth by at least $2.2 billion. This judge from New York. Now, this is how this worked. You know, you imagine this. You have been charged with a crime. Now, this is a civil case. I realize there's a difference here, and I'm going to use language that doesn't quite apply to civil cases, and I'll clean that up afterwards. But just imagine you've been accused of a crime, and you go into court expecting to have a trial, and the judge looks at the discovery, you know, of your side and the prosecutor's side, and looks it over and says, "Holy crap, there's so much evidence here. We don't need a trial. I'm going to just say that you're guilty. You have no defense. This evidence is irrefutable. Off to prison with you." Well, that's essentially what happened yesterday. It wasn't, you don't use the word guilty, you use the word liable because it's a civil proceeding, not a criminal proceeding. But basically what the judge did is he said, we don't need a trial on this. Any idiot can look at this and see that Trump lied to all these banks and insurance companies and that is fraud on its face. So let's just skip to the part where we decide how many years in jail he gets, which is what it would be if it was criminal proceeding. But again, because this is a civil proceeding, it's going to be how much is the fine going to be? And what other penalties, for example, losing his license to do business or his ability to have a license to do business in New York State. And the judge has scheduled a hearing for that in just a couple weeks down the road. Now, Trump is going to appeal this. There's no doubt about that. He'll appeal it to the New York Supreme Court. This was a Supreme Court justice, by the way, Arthur Engron, who ruled in this case. But the trial, which was scheduled to go from October 2nd to December 22nd, the trial had been scheduled to run for 2 months, almost 2 months, 7 weeks. That trial's probably now going to last a week or two, because the whole, the 7 weeks, 6 of those 7 weeks, in all probability, were to determine whether Trump was guilty or liable, to use the proper language. And, the judge already decided that. Letitia James is asking for a $250 million fine. I am not certain, but I believe that that is the maximum that she can ask for, or she would be asking for more. I mean, this is a $2.5 billion fraud. Arguably the largest fraud in the history of the United States. And again, why the media isn't characterizing it that way, I don't know. I'm scratching my head on this thing. Trump's lawyer, Christopher Kise, told the judge that Trump could inflate the value of his properties because he's, quote, an investment genius and probably one of the most successful real estate developers in the country. He's a master at finding value where others see nothing. Yep, my home is worth $50 million. The judge was having none of it. The judge said, quote, in defendant's world, well-regulated apartments, rent-regulated apartments are worth the same as unregulated apartments. Restricted land is worth the same as unrestricted land. Restrictions can evaporate into thin air. A disclaimer by one party casting responsibility on another party exonerates the other party's lies. He said, this is a fantasy world, not the real world. And by the way, this is just the beginning for Trump. In January, he's going to court in New York. E. Jean Carroll asking for another $10 million for his defamation. He's got 2 trials scheduled for March, one about Stormy Daniels and one about the January 6th insurrection. He's got a trial in Florida for his violations of the Espionage Act that they haven't come up with a date yet for because Judge Eileen Cannon is doing everything she can to help him procrastinate, to stall it. And then there's another trial over the fraud in Georgia. And that trial date has not yet been set either. So a lot going on here. It's amazing. All right, let's talk about the Republican debate. Is this thing fake? Oh, and also libertarianism. Why do Republicans embrace cruelty like tearing moms from their kids? I'll get to that right after the break. It's 17 minutes past the hour. Stay with us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned. And welcome back. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning to you, Tom. Listen, there was a fellow by the name of Bruce McNall. He was the owner of the Los Angeles Kings, the hockey, professional hockey team. Listen, the guy went to jail for doing the same thing that Donald Trump did. Now, I heard you mention that, you know, this is not a criminal thing. This is more like something else. But listen, folks go to prison, Tom, for fraud. They really do. Take my word for it. So there's no reason for Donald Trump not to go to prison. Okay, behave yourself. Talk to you later.
Yeah, thank you, Morris. I mean, you know, what's going on here is that the Attorney General could have brought a criminal charge against Trump. For that matter, you know, there was a time there when we thought that the Manhattan DA was going to bring a criminal charge against Trump, but that didn't quite come out. Now you've got Alvin Bragg with new charges against Trump. Those have been kind of fallen off the radar screen. I don't know what happened to those. But anyway, yeah, absolutely. Russ in Upland, California. Hey, Russ, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was calling about the real estate fraud. Mm-hmm. I was a lifetime real estate appraiser ever since I was barely 20 years old, okay? Mm-hmm. I have the highest level of licensing you can get in real estate appraisal. I had worked for lenders for many years and then was independent, but I have seen pretty much all the real estate fraud you ever want to even think about, mm-hmm. okay? And it's rampant. I can't believe that, number one, how a lender could get away with taking someone's word for what their property's worth.
Well, it wasn't just Trump's word. I mean, he also corrupted.
If you make a loan on real estate as collateral, you need to get an appraisal by an independent appraiser.
Right, but Trump was corrupting his appraisers. He was paying off his appraisers, too.
Well, the thing of it is, the banks have got to be taken to task for this
Yeah.
and sued to the nth degree because they are endangering millions of people and investors, depositors for being complicit in this fraud. Yeah. And this just drives me crazy. I'm stuttering.
Do you think that if Trump is convicted, do you think if Trump is held liable for this in civil court, that might open criminal proceedings? Have you ever seen that happen?
Very, very rarely. Do you know how many people have gone to prison
for real estate fraud?
Fined over real estate fraud, like from the big crash of the early 2000s?
I don't know.
How about zero?
Yeah, I know there were something like 700 or 800 people who were prosecuted in 1987 for the crash, the SNL crash. There were a bunch of SNL executives who went to prison.
Right, but
that was a big deal.
The last time through, everybody walked.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a personal friend of mine was the head of a bank, a local bank that I used to work for. Mm-hmm. And they went under, and he was getting close. He was afraid he was going to jail.
Wow. Wow.
So,
amazing.
Something better happened.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Thanks for the information, Russ. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah. It's 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. You know, one of the grand questions that political scientists have been scratching their heads over for years in America is, why do right-wing billionaires fund anti-black history movements? Why are they pouring money into these people? Why are they funding anti-trans movements? I mean, what does this have to do with being a billionaire? Well, it turns out it has a lot to do with it, and here's why. Almost 30 million Americans lack health insurance. 37 million of us live in dire poverty. 1 in 5 of us are illiterate. A quarter of Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental illness and can't get treatment. 316 people are shot every day in America. 44% of us carry student debt. And the billionaires don't want to pay income taxes to deal with any of these problems of society. That's the real issue. If they can get us fighting with each other over black history or over trans people or kids, they win. Then we're not talking about taxing them, raising their taxes to where they should be. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com that you can read and see all the stats and all the hot links. Check it out. And welcome back. My op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is part 2 of, what is libertarianism? Where did the Libertarian Party come from, and where did their philosophy come from? The party came out of the real estate lobby in the 1950s, and they created this political party, the Libertarian Party, specifically to have a political rationalization, for deregulating the real estate industry, deregulating finance, deregulating insurance, real estate sales. They wanted to get rid of rent control. This was a big deal for them in the 1950s. It was it was sweeping America's big cities. So that's why the Libertarian Party was started. Its first serious major national figure as a candidate was David Koch, running for vice president in 1980 on a platform of ending Social Security, ending Medicare, ending Medicaid, ending all public schools, ending all federal support to hospitals, and ending public roads, turning all of our roads and streets into toll roads that are owned by billionaires, and basically ending all public services except for police and the military and the courts. That's it. So that's where the Libertarian Party came from. Now, where did the philosophy come from? The philosophy came from Ayn Rand. And Ayn Rand wrote a series of books. The one that Donald Trump said he loved is The Fountainhead. That's the story of a woman who gets raped and decides she likes it. But Atlas Shrugged is the more commonly quoted of her books. It's the one where these two spoiled brats, these two siblings,
Dabney and I forget her brother's name, inherit a railroad from their father and then get all bent out of shape because the unionized workers in the railroad don't want to take a chance on experimenting with a new train that might be deadly. They want it to be tested and proven safe before they put passengers on it. And so anyway, that's the story. But where did Ayn Rand get her heroes from? She based them on a guy named Edward Hickman. Edward Hickman was a teenager in the 1920s who kidnapped a 12-year-old girl, cut her up into pieces, gave her sliced up body back to her father in exchange for a $1,200, which was a year's salary back then, a $1,200 payment, as it were, kidnapping ransom. And Ayn Rand fell in love with this guy. He got arrested ultimately. He killed this woman in Los Angeles, but he got arrested here in Oregon and got the noose. He was sent to the gallows. And Ayn Rand raged against that. He said, this is a man who's completely selfish. He believes totally in himself and nothing else. Hickman had said, I'm like the state. What's good for me is good for everybody. And so Ayn Rand explicitly, she writes about it in her journals, based her heroes on this child murderer, Edward Hickman. And, I think that's probably all we need to know. I mean, where did the sociopathy, this psychopathy, where did this come from? In the Republican Party, it came out of Ayn Rand. She was quite proud of it, in fact. And, for 42 years, we've had this libertarian experiment imposed on us ever since Ronald Reagan embraced libertarian ideas. He opened his first inaugural address on January 20th, 1981 by saying, government is not the solution to your problems. Government itself is the problem. That's libertarianism, and that's where it came from.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Tonight is the GOP debate. Are these guys going to be trying to figure out who's going to be VP, or is this just all, hey, let's climb the ladder? I'll share my thoughts with you on that in just a moment.
Shadow of the JFK assassination by Lamar Waldron and me. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963, triggered cover-ups by officials, this is from the introduction, by the way, that continue to negatively impact American politics, life, and foreign policy. Legacy of Secrecy details those cover-ups and hidden investigations, many for the first time, including the reasons they were carried out under such intense secrecy. Most were spawned by John and Robert Kennedy's top-secret 1963 plan to stage a coup against Fidel Castro, a plan so highly classified that it only started to be exposed in 2005 and is finally revealed in this book. Their own confessions now show that three mafia bosses, Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, and Johnny Roselli, were behind JFK's assassination. They used parts of the secret coup plan to kill JFK in a way that forced Attorney General Robert Kennedy, President Lyndon B. Johnson, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and high CIA official Richard Helms to withhold critical information not only from the public and the press, but also from each other and sometimes their own investigators. It's important to keep in mind that JFK was murdered just a year after the tense nuclear standoff during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The main goals of U.S. officials were to prevent a nuclear confrontation with the Soviets and to protect JFK's ally high up in the Cuban government, Commander Juan Almeida, head of the Cuban Army in 1963, still listed as Cuba's number 3 official today. While U.S. leaders have managed to prevent a confrontation with Russia and preserve a critical ally in the Cuban government, this limited the investigation into JFK's murder, allowing the 3 mafia chiefs and their associates to remain free. As a result, the long shadow of secrecy surrounding both JFK's murder and the coup plan set the stage for the murder of Martin Luther King, ultimately driving 2 presidents from office and bringing about the murders of 5 congressional witnesses in the mid-1970s. Legacy of Secrecy breaks important new ground in key areas, detailing for the first time Louisiana Godfather Carlos Marcello's clear confession to ordering JFK's assassination. Marcello's criminal empire ranged from Dallas to Memphis, and previously secret files at the National Archives have shown that he made this confession in 1985 to an FBI informant ruled credible by a federal judge as part of a secret FBI undercover sting operation named Camtex. Exposed here for the first time, Camtex yielded Marcello's admission that he'd met Lee Harvey Oswald and set Jack Ruby up in business in Dallas. The operation also generated hundreds of hours of heretofore secret prison audio tapes of Marcello discussing his crimes, recorded using the FBI informant's bugged transistor radio. Yet the FBI and Justice Department withheld most of that information from the public and Congress for years until its revelation in this book. Carlos Marcello wasn't the only mob boss who confessed his involvement in JFK's murder to a trusted associate. Legacy also uncovers important new information about Marcello's partners in JFK's assassination, Tampa Godfather Santos Trafficante and Johnny Roselli, the Chicago Mafia's man in Las Vegas and Hollywood. Shortly before their deaths, both mobsters admitted their roles in JFK's murder to their attorneys. Two of their associates with documented ties to the secret JFK Al-Mehta coup plan likewise confessed. Using exclusive new information supported by FBI files apparently withheld from Congress, this book names two of the Georgia men who paid James Earl Ray to kill the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, white supremacist Joseph Miltier and Hugh R. Spake. Miltier, who had been involved in Marcello's murder of JFK, was part of a small clique of racists in Atlanta who used Marcello to broker the contract to murder Dr. King. We document James Earl Ray's ties to Marcello's heroin smuggling operation and long overlooked evidence in FBI files linking Ray to Marcello's associate, Johnny Roselli. Finally, this book explains why Ray, while fleeing to Canada the day after killing Dr. King in Memphis, made a 400-plus mile detour south to Atlanta, where he contacted Spake to get help from Miltier. In 1979, the last congressional committee to investigate the murders of JFK and Dr. King, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, concluded, quote, that Trafficante, like Marcello, had the motive, means, and opportunity to assassinate President Kennedy, end of quote from the congressional report. The HSCA had been created in the wake of Roselli's sensational murder, but the HSCA was unable to establish direct evidence of Marcello's complicity. And the same was true for Trafficante and Roselli, because the CIA, FBI, and other federal agencies withheld so many relevant files. The HSCA, headed by civil rights figure Louis Stokes, also concluded there was a likelihood of conspiracy in the assassination of Dr. King and that financial gain was James Earl Ray's primary motivation. But they were unable to determine who had paid Ray or how the conspiracy had worked because the FBI and other agencies had hid critical files. With the help of more than 24 associates of John and Robert Kennedy, backed up by thousands of recently released documents at the National Archives, many of which are quoted here for the first time, Legacy tells the full story denied to Congress and the American people, legacy of secrecy.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. We are still trying to raise some money for Joyce Nance, our former phone screener, who got, after she left our employ, got a cancer diagnosis that is truly dreadful, metastasized lung cancer that has spread into her bones. She's in a lot of pain and facing some real challenges. So there's a GoFundMe page. GoFundMe.com, of course, is the website.
and then just click the little search button and type in Joyce's name, Joyce Nance, Joyce Nance, Nance with an N. And is that Malcolm Nance? Is that his last name the same? Yeah, same as Malcolm. Although I don't know if they're related or not. Probably not. But also, Joyce is an author. She's got several books for sale over on Amazon and other online platforms. If you have any interest. So, just wanted to let you know about that. The Republican debate is fake. This is an interesting piece over on Vox.com by Zach Beaucamp. He says it's not a real event. It's a performance, a show, a pantomime, a shiny object. I mean, Donald Trump is over 50% right now. The spread between Ron DeSantis, who is number 2, and Donald Trump on the Republican side is about the same as the spread between Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Joe Biden on the Democratic side. In other words, it's no way that Ron DeSantis is going to be the nominee unless Trump drops dead, or gets somehow debilitated. Frankly, I almost said or gets thrown into prison, but the more I think about it, the more I think even if he was thrown into prison, he'd pull a Eugene Debs. He'd run for president from prison, just like Eugene Debs did back in the 1920s. So there are no serious challengers to Donald Trump, and there won't be in tonight's debate. What we do have, though, is classic Republican content, which is a bunch of grifters pretending that they actually have a chance to become president, when in fact what they are running for is a permanent slot on Fox News that can pay good money, plus it raises your profile, or to sell, their next book, or for future political races, that they want to run for the United States Senate in the future, or they're going to, try to become an ambassador in the next Republican administration or whatever. It never hurts to raise your profile, and that's what these people are doing tonight. So I don't know. Sean and I were talking about drinking games earlier for tonight. I'm not willing to damage my liver for the Republicans, frankly. So I don't have any plans to be drinking tonight, but and I'm still debating whether we're going to watch the debate or not. It's just, I suppose my one click on Fox News is not going to increase their numbers so much that it's consequential. But geez, who really wants to put up with this or watch this or inflict this on themselves? I mean, this is going to be tough. All right, let's pick up your calls here. 37 minutes past the hour. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, how you doing?
I am fine, sir, and I hope you are as well. I do want to say briefly, we love you, Joyce, and I'm going to do what I can to assist
Thank you.
Joyce.
Thank you. By the way, how's your newsletter going over on Substack?
Well, let's say it's causing enough of a stir.
Good.
And we're being read in 14 countries now, and I'm real proud of that. And I want to thank you so much. Listen, I wanted to be as pithy as possible. I had a comment, I had a question, and an observation, and I'll make them quick. I wanted to remind everyone that you had mentioned at the top of the show that, or the top of the program, that Donald Trump, of course, uses these racist terms. He calls black people racist and thugs, but he also has a special one for Letitia James.
That's right.
And that's Tisha. Yeah, right. Tisha Boo.
Yeah.
And Tisha Boo is a variation on the very derogatory black racist, anti-blackist slur Jigaboo, which is also related to Boo Boo. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I had an observation, and you've already kind of discussed it. Of course, tonight's Republican debate is nothing but an audition for either vice president or some of the other ancillary things that you had mentioned. Of course, it is. It's not a matter of how far Donald Trump is ahead. It's how much farther is he ahead. Right. So I think that but there are two people and that come to mind, and that's Mike Pence and Chris Christie. They've used a different political calculus, and I think that aside from those two, everyone else is running to be in Trump's camp. Of course, Haley and Tim Scott or whatever that guy's name is. I think that's definitely what is going on now. I do want to say this, Tom. There is something that's afoot I don't see Donald Trump ever in jail. I just don't, personally.
Yeah.
But I do see he's going to be convicted on some felonies. There's no way, with all of this litigation going on, that he can go unscathed throughout all of this rainstorm of litigation. I think that's astronomical. What I think could happen is, and you had mentioned the gap between he and DeSantis, but let me tell you something. If Trump, for whatever reason, you said drop dead or whatever the case is, I think he's going to be made legally ineligible to be president as a result of these indictments and the subsequent adjudications of those indictments. If that happens, Ron DeSantis is king.
Yeah.
So let us not forget. Let's not count out DeSantis. And let me tell you something. If you get DeSantis, you're going to get Trump on steroids. No matter what happens, you're going to get Trump. Now, that leads me to the question that I have for you, and I'll shut my pie hole. Do you see, when you look at the 2024 election, do you see, no matter who runs on either side, because I think there's a good chance that neither of the people that we think are going to run right now for both parties will be the candidates. And there are all kinds of variables. But that notwithstanding, do you see, given the pollution of the process that Donald Trump has how he has polluted the political waters, do you see in 2024, no matter who the candidates are, this not being a disaster? Because I can't see it, Tom. I
think the only way it's not a disaster is if Biden and Harris are reelected and yeah, I mean Biden is 80 years old and it's the election's 14 months away. A lot can happen in 14 months, and Trump is morbidly obese, and a lot can happen to him too. My current speculation, Kenyatta, is that Nikki Haley is actually the strongest Republican candidate in the field. I think that Ron DeSantis is going to continue to collapse. People don't like him. The more he talks, the less people like him. And Nikki Haley is rising in the polls. She's doing well. That in a rational world, that would position her for vice president. But I'm guessing that Trump is going to pick somebody that he just knows is going to be a total sycophant, a suck up for vice president, and he doesn't care about the political consequences of it. Somebody like Mark Meadows, only it won't be Mark Meadows because he's involved in all these legal problems. But basically that, another Mike Pence, another person who's just going to, stare adoringly at him for 4 years.
But Tom, I don't see how, given how the elections have been questioned and all of this pollution, I don't see, no matter who it is, I just don't see how either Democrats or Republicans are just going to, no matter what happens, are going to walk away and say that we're good.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And you know who's going to be pouring gasoline on that fire is going to be the Russian trolls, the Chinese trolls, and the Saudis. They're going to be.
Let us not forget about AI and bots.
Yeah.
And deep fakes.
Yeah, being used by those players. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you see it all over Twitter and Facebook right now. In fact, Twitter was just notified by the European Union that they have more Russian bots than any other social media site. And apparently their response to that was to shrug their shoulders. So, Kenyatta, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. People can check out your newsletter, your Substack newsletter, by going to Substack and typing in Kenyatta, right?
Yeah, but let me just caution them to make sure that they have strong stomachs.
Yeah, be wearing some asbestos. But if you want the unvarnished thoughts of a genuinely brilliant person, I recommend Kenyatta's newsletter. I read it every time. Kenyatta, thanks a lot for the call. Joel in Las Vegas. Hey, Joel, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. About a week ago, I was going through my newspaper here in Las Vegas, and I just have this since I heard about Eye of Stone saying don't, read the back pages, looking back there for the real news. And I happened to come across a little 2 small paragraph line. It said Washington, Pritzker to coordinate U.S. private rebuild of Ukraine.
Right.
The Biden administration tapped former Commerce Secretary and major Democratic donor Penny Pritzker to coordinate U.S. efforts to channel private sector reconstruction assistance to Ukraine.
Right.
President Joe Biden and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken announced the appointment on Thursday after the
No, I got it.
Treasury.
What's your point, Joel?
My point is they're already lining up the money to rebuild.
Right. And that's
And
bad.
they're also giving the money to blow it up.
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, they're in a war. You're fighting Russia. Russia has destroyed much of the country. The odds that we'll be able to get any money out of Russia to rebuild it are pretty slim. God bless Penny Pritzker, because they need to rebuild the damn country.
And another point is our friends, the Saudis, are now friends with Russia, and actually we're financing the war through that.
I don't know that we're financing the war through it, but, you know, the Saudis and Russians have jacked up the price of oil radically by cutting oil production. That is being done to try to help Donald Trump get elected next year. They want to see gasoline prices in the United States at $7 a gallon.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 46 minutes past the hour. More of your calls right after this. Stay with us. And welcome back. David in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Tom. You were talking about the big news about the Trump companies and all the fraud and everything. I would like to have as much ammunition as possible and information to back it up when I'm talking to Trumpers and people who just don't want to believe their eyes. Do you know how I can find, or we can find, original source material for things like that, like maybe the records that the judge pulled to show that he filed this much on his taxes and this much towards insurance, and, you know, just some of that kind of original source material on that.
Judge Oregon, or whatever his name is. It's not Oregon, but it's...
I get. I remember. It sounds like Enron or something.
Yeah, exactly. His ruling is a public document. There are hot links to it from both the New York Times article today and the Washington Post article. And that, it's, as I recall, around 35 pages. And it specifically references a lot of Trump's lies. So I would start there.
I'll start there. So it might have some references to the... to the other material. Yeah.
Read the
I noticed like some of the other... Sorry, yeah. But I noticed like some of the other indictments that come out against him don't always have the original source material, so that's just what I was after.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be where I would start. David, good luck. And you could also Google Letitia James's charge against him. That's a public record as well. It's a much longer document, but you know, that's got to be out there as a PDF someplace. In fact, it's got to be all over the place. Thank you, David.
All right.
Yep. Jim in Austin, Texas. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Well, good morning, Tom. Just a point on the strange court nomenclature up in New York. The Supreme Court is not the top court in New York. It is the court of greatest trial jurisdiction. Unlike every other state and the federals, the Supreme Court's a trial court in New York. And then the intermediate appellate court is something called the, not the panel, but anyway, the appellate division of the New York Supreme Court.
What is their equivalent of a Supreme Court? What's that called?
That is the Court of Appeals of New York.
I see.
That's my next explanation. It's extremely confusing.
Yeah.
I'm a lawyer here in Texas, and here and all the law schools, one of the first things one has to learn when he starts reading cases is that the New York terminology for their courts is unlike anybody else.
Thank you for that, because I mentioned this on the air this morning, that this judge is a New York Supreme Court judge, and I'm scratching my head going, wait a minute, this is going to get appealed to the Supreme Court. But the court above the New York Supreme Court is called the Appeals Court. Normally it's the other way around.
Well, actually, the court above the Supreme Court, which is the trial court. The court above that is the New York Supreme Court Appellate Division. That's what is generically called the Intermediate Court of Appeals. Yeah. Not all states have that. We have it in Texas, but most of the larger states do. That's an intermediate appellate court. Right. Then the top court in New York is called the Court of Appeals. Mm-hmm. And that's very confusing to everyone, and I detected when you said that perhaps it was confused to you, and I think I've heard that in something else you've said. So
thank you so much, Jim. I really appreciate it.
It's really hard to deal with.
Yeah, it is.
Believe me, it confuses lawyers and certainly law students if they're not working with New York law.
I get it. It confused me, and I am very grateful to you for calling up and sharing that. Thank you, Jim. I'm telling you, we've got the smartest listeners and viewers on earth. Thank you, Jim. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. It's 9 minutes before the hour. Picking up your calls here. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Well, yeah, I wanted to talk about the case, the Letitia James case, and add something to that, especially for one of the callers who wanted to have debate points for his Trump humper friends. I don't know that all the details are important, but it starts with, let's go a little Constitution 101 with the Seventh Amendment. The reason the judge can make this, because you see, the judge can make this determination, this judgment, is and the right wing megaphone is always saying that Trump's being denied a fair trial by a jury. The Seventh Amendment says that in suits at common law exceeding where the amount of controversy exceeds $20, the trial by jury shall be preserved. And like the founding fathers didn't just use different words for variety. Preserved, and it says as the rules of the common law. Mm-hmm. And so what it means is you have a right to a trial by jury as per the rules of the Old English common law, and the Supreme Court has said that this is not sufficiently fundamental of a right that it would be incorporated in the 14th Amendment and held to the states. So the states can determine and how they want to handle that. And in civil cases, the judge can make what's called a judgment as a matter of law, which is similar to a summary judgment. Only a summary judgment is normally a summary dismissal. There's not enough evidence to go forward. Right. Well, in this case, at any time, the judge can decide to take the decision from the jury and say, I've heard enough, either from the beginning. In this case, you've already seen there's enough evidence here that no reasonable jury could find for the defendant. Right. And so he's making. And that's what happened here yesterday. Right. He made a judgment as a matter of law. Right. And this is, by the way, very convincing because there's two things. Let's go back to 2016 and the Trump University class action suit for fraud. Mm-hmm. This is really, you have to understand that there are 5 criteria that a court has to certify for fraud, which are a false statement made by the party knowing it was false, intent to deceive, and the victim was dependent on that deception and suffered damage because of it. There's also 6 criterion for certifying a class action suit, which are not an easy lift either. So to have a class action suit for fraud certified by a court basically means you are one slime ball. I mean, that's 11 things. That's what he got nailed with Trump University. But what he did is he settled it because here's the deal. Well, fraud is in a fraud case, it's not just a preponderance of the evidence, but it's not as high as beyond reasonable doubt. It's like 75%. There's a added weight of a burden of proof. So for a judge to say, I'm making a judgment as a matter of law in a fraud case, it's extraordinary to not let a jury hear it because normally judges do not want to take the power away from the jury because the Seventh Amendment also says that no fact tried by a jury shall be in question in any court of the United States than by the rules of the common law. So the judges don't really want to take the case away from the jury. Now, they can't make a judgment as a matter of law in a criminal case. That's the Sixth Amendment. You absolutely have a right to a trial by jury in a criminal case.
Right.
But in this case, it's so egregious that Trump is such a slime. And the other thing is, the reason Trump settled that case is because if you're ever convicted of fraud, your testimony is basically completely impeachable in any other case.
Oh, really?
Other convictions cannot be held. Other convictions cannot be held against a witness in a trial, except fraud. If you've ever been convicted of fraud,
so once you've been busted as being a
fraud,
professional con man, your word is worth nothing going forward.
Exactly.
Wow.
And so he can't even testify. He can't even be trusted to testify on his own behalf in a civil case. That's why he settled the case.
Amazing, amazing. Paul, I need to move along, but thank you. Thank you for bringing a little enlightenment to us. I appreciate it. Steve in New Boston, Massachusetts. Hey, Steve, or Michigan, excuse me. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Hey, I was looking on YouTube, and I came across the video that President Zelensky had an interview, and the Republicans took him way out of context here. They only showed part of the interview where he's saying that if we're going to have U.S. boots on the ground fighting the Russians in Ukraine, and that's not true. What Zelensky had said was that if we just continue supporting Ukraine to keep the war going against the Russians where they can defeat the Russians and Ukraine loses, Russia will advance on other countries, including NATO countries, of which we will have to put boots on the ground.
Right.
And we will be fighting and we will be dying.
Yeah, his generals have said Poland, Latvia, Lithuania are next. Yeah, I get that, Steve. I've seen those. I've seen clips like that. I saw one on Twitter about a week ago. It's pretty disgusting when you've got to cut up clips like that to basically lie to the American people. But that's what the Russian trolls are doing. Steve, thanks for the call. Thanks for the heads up on it. I do appreciate it because those things are going viral. Bob Menendez is speaking at the Senate right now. Apparently, trying to justify staying in office. This guy needs to go. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Stay with us. Ishan Mehta is going to tell us about net neutrality.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. The chair of the Federal Communications Commission, Jessica Rosenworcel, has announced that the agency is going to begin proceedings at their open meeting, October 19th of this year, about 3 weeks from now, to restore net neutrality. On the line with us is Ishan Mehta, the Director of Media and Democracy at commoncause.org. The Twitter handle, of course, is Common Cause as well. Ishan, welcome to the program. Tell us, if you could, what exactly net neutrality is and how different the Internet was when it was operating under terms of net neutrality, or would be operating under terms of net neutrality, versus the way it's operating right now.
Yeah, Tom, thanks so much for having me. So very simply, net neutrality or network neutrality means that ISPs, internet service providers like Comcast and Charter, aren't allowed to throttle, block, or prioritize internet to your home. So they can't have Netflix come to you at a slower speed than their own streaming service. And I think it's a tenet of how the internet was designed that we should have all data be treated equally, and that proposal was codified in 2015. We had net neutrality regulations in place for 3 years before the Trump FCC overturned it. And since then, we've seen instances where not only have the ISPs, slowed down certain services or prioritized others, they've also throttled public safety responses. So in Santa Clara, during the California fires a couple of years ago, the response vehicle of one of the firefighters, their connectivity was throttled by Verizon. And, the FCC had no authority to intervene because they had overturned these regulations.
Right.
So, while it is a consumer protection issue, it very much is a public safety issue as well.
That's a fascinating perspective. Isn't there a privacy aspect to this too? My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, I may well be, was that under net neutrality rules, under Title II, basically the internet is regulated somewhat like your phone calls. That is to say, your telephone provider can't listen in on your phone calls. You have some assurance of privacy. And that when net neutrality got blown up, the internet service providers basically were able to monitor literally every communication we make over the internet and track it and record it and all that kind of stuff. With net neutrality, that ability of them to do that would go away. Or am I missing something?
No, you're absolutely right. Privacy is very much a key tenet of Title II regulations, which is under the umbrella net neutrality falls in. And, when this reclassification was done, the FCC also ceded authority on privacy. So it allowed ISPs to access sort of every website you visit, every search you do, what times of the day you use the internet, what devices you use it from. So
and to sell that information, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. For quite a lot of profit, use it to sell services on top, because a lot of these companies are monopolistic, they're vertically integrated. So not only are they selling you the broadband, they're selling you the streaming service that travels over that broadband. So, without these regulations, the consumer really loses.
I would think this would be the number one way to promote net neutrality, would be to say to Republicans out there as well as Democrats, right now your internet service provider can see every single website you visit. They can tell how long you sit on that website. They can tell what you look at on that website. If you fill out a form on that website, they can see your keystrokes. Every single email you send or receive, they have the ability to read, and they can take all that information, and it's now theirs, essentially all of your personal activity, and they can sell that information to anybody they want, or they could use it against you. And I would think that that would be huge.
Yeah, you said it better than I could. I think you're absolutely right. This is not only a sort of consumer protection issue, it's a privacy issue. It's also a democracy issue, right? Like, the internet is the virtual public square. It is where social justice movements start. It is where we organize. It is where we find out how to vote, where to vote. And to cede control of this platform of this public commons to the private sector that we know have not always acted in the American people's best interest is just not smart public policy. So we are at Common Cause are really glad to see Chair Rosenworcel call for net neutrality regulations. We're really hoping the October 19th meeting approves this proposal, and then we see rules in place very soon.
Yeah, I'm with you. So we're talking with Ishan Mehta, the Director of Media and Democracy at commoncause.org. Ishan, as we've been discussing this, the ability that the internet service providers have now to monitor everything you're doing online and to read all your emails and everything else, and to sell that information is literally making billions of dollars for them, because they are selling that information aggressively right now. These data brokers and things like this, the files that they have on all of us now are just bulging. What that means is that a lack of net neutrality, and by the way, the Trump administration blew up net neutrality with Ajit Pai, their former Verizon lobbyist who was his head of the FCC. They blew it up after I believe it was over 1 million comments against net neutrality were posted on their website. And then later, after they blew it up, it was revealed that virtually all of those were phonies, that they were from bots. But that said, my understanding is that they're making billions of dollars. The Supreme Court has said it is perfectly legal for big corporations to buy their own favorite politicians, to shower money on politicians. They call it free speech now instead of bribery. And so you're going to have, Common Cause is going to have, billionaires up against you, billion-dollar corporations, some of the largest corporations in America up against you in this net neutrality debate. This is a real David versus Goliath thing. What kind of chance do we have of actually getting back our damn privacy?
Well, I'm optimistic, Tom. Common Cause is a member-driven organization. We have close to 1 million members. We're very engaged. I fully plan to organize our team, our members, to be able to write to the FCC when this docket opens, when they open the comment period, and share their stories. One sort of thing we have going for us is, it's a silver lining to the pandemic that we saw how critical a resource broadband is. And I think the story strikes a lot closer to home now that folks have had to deal with multiple people on calls or classes from the same sort of router at their home, or even and that's a lucky situation. So folks had to drive to McDonald's parking lots to do their homework. So I think we as a country realize how important broadband is. I think that will help more and more people realize how important net neutrality is, how important making sure those connections are private is. And so we're hoping to get folks from far and wide to write to the FCC, talk about why net neutrality is important to them.
I'm with you. And you can read all about it at commoncause.org. Ishan Mehta is the Director of Media and Democracy with Common Cause. Ishan, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be here.
Truly appreciate the information. It is 14 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The sick, racist message behind why Trump chose the particular gun store that he went to this week. I'll tell you about that on the other side of this break. And welcome back, John in Los Angeles. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, hold on. Let me get this phone working. Yeah. Hey, Jeff, how are you doing?
It's Tom, John, and you're on the air.
Wow, my mistake.
So what's on your mind?
Part of the two-party flim-flam. But anyway, the question that I have is after the Donald Trump goes down, are all the other people who ally themselves with him, as well as those who wish to directly oppose him, they're going to be going down also?
I don't think so. As I said earlier when I was talking with Kenyatta, my prediction is that there's a reasonably good chance that Nikki Haley is going to be the nominee for the GOP. That, we're still a ways out from the Republican primaries. I think that's going to be next spring. And, a lot's going to happen in Trump world. And he just got nailed for fraud. And yes, it wasn't criminal, but he just got nailed. There's a new poll out that was just published this morning. Mediaite has a story about it by Isaac Shore, that 79% of Republicans in Iowa are considering other candidates than Donald Trump. Only 20% in Iowa of voters, Republican voters, say that they are only going to vote for Trump. Same in New Hampshire. Only 23% of New Hampshire voters say they are completely committed to Trump. This is information that, I don't think Trump is going to make it through the primary. Increasingly, we'll see. Mike in Wheeling, West Virginia. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hey, thank you. I have two quick things I'd like to say. Number one, first of all, I got out of high school in 1964, and I went into the service for 4 years, and then I got out and got some education, and I went to work for the federal government. And I worked for the Internal Revenue Service over 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Two questions I got. During Reaganomics trickled down, which is probably the biggest disaster this country has ever seen. I mean, you can actually take Trump's tax cuts and George W. Bush's tax cuts for the wealthy, put them together, and they couldn't even come near what Reagan did.
Right. He tripled the national debt.
I was working with the IRS at the time, and within the first 2 years, our revenue dropped off by 20% because we were taxing 70, 80, 90% taxes on the wealthy people.
Right.
And then they dropped down to 27%. He did, and he took away from the poor, to pay for it. But Reaganomics destroyed this country. And again, like I said, you could take Trump and George W. Bush, and they still haven't done it. And I seen what happened because I was with the IRS. My second, and I like to know how you feel about that, but my second question is, I'm also a disabled veteran from the Vietnam War, from the Agent Orange Guard stuff. And back in March of this year, during the debt ceiling issue, McCartney and Republicans wanted to cut veterans' benefits by 20 to 30%.
Right. They're constantly wanting to do that.
And agreed with it. Now, how can any veteran, Tom, vote for that guy?
Yeah.
I don't understand that. Those are my two questions.
And Trump also says that he doesn't want to see disabled veterans, visible in public anymore, and that people who lost their lives as veterans were losers and suckers. I mean, Trump is just dancing to Putin's tune. I mean, that's the bottom line, Mike. And thank you for testifying about the damage of Reaganomics, because I agree with you. You're absolutely right. Mike, thank you. I hope we have future conversations about this. I appreciate the call. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Fort Lauderdale, Florida recently got whacked with 25 inches of rainfall in less than 7 hours. Tornadoes are tearing up the South and the Midwest in ways that they haven't seen, frankly, ever before. I mean, there have always been tornadoes, but not like these. 200-mile-an-hour winds, these derecos that are a mile long. We have a serious crisis going on right now. There's also a major El Nino. It's off the coast of Peru right now. It's affecting the West Coast. So we're seeing wild swings from drought to floods to drought to floods in the West Coast. Climate change is here. Climate change is real, and climate change is a crisis. What do we know about it? What do we know about these things? How much worse is it going to get before it might get better? What can we do about it? We had a long conversation with Dr. Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor and Director of the Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media at the University of Pennsylvania. There's a whole long rant about this over at hartmanreport.com. Check it out. 20 minutes past the hour. By the way, we've been talking about the Republican primary debate tonight. This is fascinating. Mediaite just published this story. Donald Trump, all the polls show Donald Trump having this huge lead. Well, maybe. Only 20% of Iowa voters say that they're only going to vote for Donald Trump. 48% say that they are still undecided about going with either Trump or somebody else. 31% say they're not even willing to cast a ballot for Trump. Similar story in New Hampshire. Only 23% of voters in New Hampshire say that they're backing Trump no matter what. 43% are keeping their options open, and 34% refuse to consider Trump at all. So, we'll see where this goes, but I think things are up in the air, far more than the media is telling us, frankly. The sick, racist message behind why Trump chose that particular gun store. This from Terry Otten over at the newrepublic.com. A couple of weeks ago, or it was in late August, a white man walked into a Dollar General store in a black neighborhood in Jacksonville, Florida, which is just down the road from South Carolina. Walked into this store with an AR-15 and a Glock and murdered 3 black people, leaving behind a manifesto saying that he murdered these people because they were black, because he hated black people. This is a true Trump follower. He bought his gun in South Carolina from the Palmetto State Armory, which is a gun store. Now, when these 3 black people were murdered and several others were wounded, when these 3 black people were murdered in Jacksonville, Donald Trump did not say one word. No condolences, no condemnation, not one word. Instead, what he did is he organized a trip to the gun store that sold this murderer his gun. Let that sink in. This gun store, by the way, in 2020 started explicitly marketing guns to militia members, the Boogaloo Boys. They've got a Boogaloo gun. This is Boogaloo slang for race violence and a call for an all-out race war, as well as toppling our government. It's grim stuff. Meanwhile, down in Florida, a school district has banned all books containing any queer characters, regardless of how central or peripheral they may be to the story. If there's a character in the book whose best friend has 2 moms, boom, that book is out. Even though there's no discussion of lesbianism or 2 momsism or anything like that. This is extraordinary. In fact, this is Charlotte County, Florida. An entire school district has banned all library books containing any LGBTQ plus individuals. We're talking about identity. And they say that they're doing this because of the Don't Say Gay law, also known as the Florida Parental Rights and Education Act. Under these rules now in this county, if a student brings one of these banned books to school to read quietly in the corner during recess or something, they can't do it. They can get kicked out of school for that, or they can have the book confiscated. How long are Americans going to tolerate this? I mean, we've got essentially an entire industry promoting book bans. Book bans. What the Nazis did. We don't ban books in America, or at least we didn't. Now this is happening in over 20 states. Basically every red state in America has some group of people trying to ban, well, not just red states. It happened here in Oregon. We've got people demanding that books be removed from schools and libraries. And it's typically a small handful of people, a half a dozen people, one or two in a state, who are issuing requests for bans of hundreds, in some cases, hundreds of books. And you know what's making this really go viral is social media. These people are finding their platforms on social media. And these right-wing groups, and they're being funded now by right-wing billionaires. So here we've got these small groups of right-wing bigots who hate queer people just because they're themselves. How dare you be who you were born? And they're now tearing down these books. They're ripping these books out of schools. They're denying young gay kids an opportunity to see themselves reflected in literature. Can you imagine? I mean, this is arguably this is the same problem, if you want to call it. It's worse than a problem, but I lack language, that black people had when I was a kid. I remember there was one black kid in my school, and there wasn't a single black character in any of the books that we read in elementary school. It was all Dick and Jane, and they were all white people. This is just, that regressive and hateful, frankly. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I will pick up your calls on the other side of this break. What's on your mind today? Stay with us.
Back from the Brink by Thom Hartmann. And this is from Chapter 2, The Economy. The epigraph Woody Guthrie's saying, some men rob you with a six-gun, others rob you with a fountain pen. The title, the opening part of this chapter, The Coup of the Elites. The election of 1992 pitted Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush. While Bush was running as a conservative who was compassionate enough to hope for 1,000 points of privatized non-governmental light, Clinton campaigned as an unabashed FDR, believing in government as a solution liberal. In language reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Square Deal and FDR's Progressive New Deal, Clinton proposed a new covenant between the U.S. government and U.S. citizens. In a speech at Georgetown University on October 23, 1991, he declared, "We've got to rebuild our political life before the demagogues and the racists and those who pander to the worst in us bring this country down. People once looked at the president and the Congress to bring us together, to solve problems, to make progress. Now, in the face of massive challenges, our government stands discredited, our people are disillusioned. There's a hole in our politics where our sense of common purpose used to be. To turn America around, we've got to have a new approach, founded on our most sacred principles as a nation, with a vision for the future. We need a new covenant, a solemn agreement between the people and their government to provide opportunity for everybody, inspire responsibility throughout our society, and restore a sense of community to our great nation. A new covenant to take government back from the powerful interests in the bureaucracy and give it back to the ordinary people of our country. More than 200 years ago, our founding fathers outlined our first social compact between government and the people, not just between lords and kings. More than 100 years ago, Abraham Lincoln gave his life to maintain the union that compact created. More than 60 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt renewed that promise with a New Deal that offered opportunity in return for hard work. Today, we need to forge a new covenant that will repair the damaged bond between the people and their government, restore our basic values, embed the idea that a country has the responsibility to help people get ahead, but that the citizens have not only the right, but the responsibility to rise as far and fast as their talents and determination can take them. And most important of all, that we're all in this together. We have to make good on the words of Thomas Jefferson, who once said, "A debt of service is due from every man to his country, proportional to the bounties which nature and fortune have measured to him." End of quote from Bill Clinton. Americans loved it. A majority of voters in 1992 were old enough to remember what America was like under the 1940 to 1981 New Deal era, when a single worker with a good job had health care, a pension, and could raise a family and buy a home. When the GI Bill educated millions, when hospitals and health insurance companies in nearly every state were required by law to be not-for-profit corporations, and health care was inexpensive and widely available. And they noticed that the 12 years of Reagan and Bush had begun the process of shattering that historic era, that the middle class was slipping away, the government had become remote and hostile rather than protecting the rights of workers and the middle class. Americans elected Clinton based on his FDR-style rhetoric. They were looking forward to a return to the golden age of America's middle class. They were ready for the new covenant, and apparently so was Bill Clinton. There is every sign that he actually believed his own rhetoric. On all this, he won the election in November and spent that month and December preparing his new covenant programs to restore the American middle class. Until January. As Adam Curtis brilliantly points out in a special documentary series he did for the BBC titled The Trap, a few weeks before Bill Clinton was to be sworn into office as President of the United States, he was visited by Goldman Sachs CEO Robert Rubin, who had just taken a $40 million paycheck for his last year with Goldman and would soon become the head of Clinton's economic team tasked with carrying out the new covenant, and with Alan Greenspan. Rubin and Greenspan sat the young new president down and told him the facts of life as they saw them. Clinton would not govern as an FDR liberal. Instead, he must cut government, promote free trade, and reduce regulation of business. Clinton complied and has been richly rewarded. In his second inaugural address, he declared the era of big government is over. The philosophy represented by Rubin and Greenspan doesn't believe in government as a solution to much of anything other than wars and crime. As true classical conservatives in the mold of Sir Edmund Burke and Thomas Hobbes, many modern libertarians and neoliberals don't even believe in democracy, as any libertarian will honestly admit. They call it the tyranny of the majority, or mob rule. Instead, because they believe in the inherently evil nature of most humans, they held that a small ruling elite of good people, the wise ones, must concentrate wealth and power, the first fuels the second by and large, in a small number of hands, out of the reach of what the first American conservative President John Adams called the rabble, us. They believed that social stability was more important than social mobility. As of this writing, the surest way to become wealthy in the United States or Britain is to be born to wealthy parents. The surest way to be poor is to be born to poor parents. Social mobility, the ability to move between classes for better or worse, has been rolled back from its highly fluid levels in the 1940 to 1980 years to a rigidity last measured in the 1920s as America was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. Conservatives since Sir Edmund Burke's opposition to the Revolutionary War of 1776 to today's opponents of labor rights believe that too much power and wealth in the hands of the middle class will inevitably lead to instability. The book, Threshold, The Progressive Plan to Take America Back from the Brink.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmanReport.com. Check it out. So back in 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt became president, we were in the depths of the Great Depression. He raised the top income tax rate on billionaires from 25% to 90%. The ultra-rich were screaming, and here's what he had to say.
A number of my friends who belong in the very high upper bracket have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am reelected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
He just took it right to them, right? Now, what came out of that was the world's largest and fastest growing and first major middle class. We can do this again. We just have to raise taxes on rich people. It's pretty straightforward. There's a whole article about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 35 minutes past the hour, and let's pick up your call, see what's on your mind today. Clark in Pontiac, Michigan. Hey, Clark. What's up?
Good afternoon, Tom. I sincerely enjoy your program. I really do. I mean, you have a viewpoint that is rarely seen in the mass media. And I happen to be blessed or cursed with a memory, with a very good memory. So I went back in C-SPAN about a couple of days ago and looked at the Mueller testimony. And he made it very clear that the only thing that was stopping the Justice Department from prosecuting on obstruction of justice was the fact that Trump was president.
Right.
Why has that information been lost for the last 3 years?
Because Merrick Garland is a wimp. I mean, you know, when Trump left office, Biden came in, and when Biden came in, he kicked out Bill Barr. Well, Barr had already been kicked out, but you know, he replaced the acting attorney general with Merrick Garland, and Merrick Garland had every ability to pick up the crimes. I mean, the Mueller report lists 10 specific prosecutable criminal instances of Donald Trump committing obstruction of justice, specifically trying to blow up any investigation into his associations with Vladimir Putin and Russia. And I mean, they're laid out. They nailed a bunch of people. They put sanctions on 20 some odd Russians. They nailed some Americans. I mean, you know,
that's right.
They got serious prosecutions. People went to jail, as I recall, or at the very least, some oligarchs lost a whole pile of money. Merrick Garland could have taken that information and gone after Donald Trump. My guess is that by now the statute of limitations is expired, although I may be wrong. I don't know. No
right, that was my next question.
But yeah.
Yeah, I just figured it had to be the statute of limitations because political will is over. That particular phase is gone because the information is there.
Yeah, typically statutes of limitations run for 5 years. I mean, I don't know what they are, and you know, when it comes to cases like this. But if it was 5 years, that would mean that Merrick Garland would have had a few months, you know, 6 months,
right.
9 months, something like that, to prosecute Trump, because a lot of this stuff was stuff that he did during the 2016 election year, before the election. But you know, 5 years. But you know, my take on Merrick Garland is that you know the guy is either a Republican, and keep in mind he was recommended to Barack Obama by the Republican senator from Utah, Orrin Hatch, and you know, because Obama went to Orrin Hatch, who was at that time, I believe he was the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and said, give me the name of a judge who is nonpartisan and who Republicans will vote for, because he wanted to get this guy on the bench. And Orrin Hatch said, here you go, Merrick Garland, here's your man. Now, he was appointed by Bill Clinton to the appeals court. So, you know, he's not, we don't really know what his, you know, political bona fides are, but my sense of it is that Merrick Garland has wimped out on so many things. I'm just very, very disappointed. Trump has gotten away with way too much. The first 2 years of the Biden presidency, you had no prosecutions for Trump's crimes. That never should have happened. So that's my take on it. Clark, thanks for the call. Rich in Indianapolis. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thank you. When you were talking about the banning of books, you cited Florida and Texas, Midland County, and in Indiana, here in Harrison County, we are having self-appointed censors, librarians, pull book titles. and it's the same idea. We have a history of self-appointed arbiters of culture. Governor Mitch Daniels, who was the one before Mike Pence, tried everything he could to ban Howard Zinn's book, A People's History.
Wow.
And then Governor Daniels retires from the governorship and becomes president of Purdue.
Wow.
And well, things are weird.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I didn't know that.
I wanted to ask a question, please, for you to mull and think about. Joe Manchin is this creature in the Democratic Party from West Virginia, and I was given the opportunity to think about the failings of Bob Menendez from New Jersey, as he's being asked to leave for his crimes, his apparent crimes. And I wanted to offer you the opportunity to compare and contrast the problems of Joe Manchin for the Democratic Party and Bob Menendez, as he's, showing these true character flaws.
Yeah.
I see character flaws in Joe Manchin too. I mean, he supports the coal industry, period. And,
he's been made a multimillionaire by the coal industry. He owns a coal company.
There.
And
yes.
And he's also 74, if my recollection is correct. And there's a lot of speculation that he's not going to run for re-election, that he's had his time in the seat. And he's, to a large extent, kind of a Democrat in name only. I mean, he's talking about this, no labels, run for president and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
I think that Joe Manchin, other than being an obstructionist in the United States Senate, helping Kyrsten Sinema block an effort to overturn Citizens United with the For the People Act, I think his time has come and gone. He's still, I'm not entirely critical of him. He's still a Democrat. He's still voting with the Democrats. He's keeping Chuck Schumer in charge of the Senate. If he were to change to a Republican, the Senate would flip to Republican control, and that would be a disaster. So, I can't, entirely criticize him, but he's not, he's not my kind of Democrat. But, he is the kind of Democrat that people in West Virginia appear to like. So we just need to respect that, I think. Rich, thanks for the call. Alan in Seattle. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
I'm just following up on your speculation about rising oil prices for the election.
Yeah.
I'm beginning to think that a lot of upper management in the oil industry is following your show, because I'm watching the market and the sectors, XLE, XOP, and XES. These are all oil sector things. 23 of 23 stocks are up in the XLE, 54 of 58 in the XOP, and 31 of 31 in XES. That's oil equipment and oil exploration and production, and, of course, the major oil companies. So stop giving them hints, Tom.
I should have bought stock. It's just so obvious, Alan. I mean, it's just so obvious that, when the Russians and Saudis get together and raise oil prices, leading into an election, and they both desperately want Donald Trump back in the White House. And then the Saudis, go ahead and buy the largest refinery in the United States and have the ability to take it offline and jack gas prices. It's just obvious. But that's interesting. I hadn't looked at the prices of the sectors. Thank you, Alan, for that. Investing 101, right? Pearson in Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Pearson, what's on your mind today?
Tom, it's always something, ain't it? It never stops.
Indeed.
On the that's a good general agreement. It's always on the other side. They find it. They have it so easy where you can have one irate priest or a minister driving in his car, hearing something that offends him on the radio coming out of George Carlin, and then cause a whole bunch of aggravation and expense for Pacifica Foundation to fight that. Or you could have one MAGA parent who shows up at a principal's office at a school complaining about a book, and that sets off a whole bunch of expense for public schools that can ill afford the time and trouble to go through.
The Carlin stuff was 30 years ago, you know.
Yeah, well, 30, 40 years, whatever it was, 1970-something.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was just a kid back then. My point, what was my point now? You derailed me.
Sorry.
I think that if one MAGA parent could show up and cause all this avalanche domino effect, why can't we have 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 regular parents, real people, show up to that same principal and say, hey, we just found out that Mrs. Smith is complaining about this. We disagree.
This is starting to happen, Pearson. This is starting to happen in a big way. We're seeing school board meetings all across the country where people are showing up and they're taking back their school boards. They're pushing back. Very often these videos of them go viral. Some of them have been quite spectacular. I think we're going to see a lot more of this as we head into the winter months, where people are, a little more indoor and they're more likely to show up for meetings and things because they're not out, picnicking and whatnot. But Americans are fed up with this.
I got a question about net neutrality. You mentioned that. That's what caused me to call. Instead of depending on individual citizens to learn about any new kind of reclaw of net neutrality, the way it used to be, and hoping that they would file either their own individual lawsuit or a group of people in a class action.
Get to the point quick, Pearson.
Against the internet provider. Why doesn't the Justice Department and the new FCC work together to proactively sue these internet companies?
To Thom Hartmann. Visit
I think they should.
ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
They should. Well, actually, no. Actually, there's no legal basis for that because net neutrality is not a thing right now. So, they can snoop on you all they want. And welcome back. John in Portland. Hey, John, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's on your mind today?
Hi, how are you doing today, Tom?
I'm great, but I'll get better. How about you, John?
Just finishing up my last Meals on Wheels route, so I'm kind of sad. Hey, I just wanted to talk about...
Are you a Meals on Wheels delivery person? Or a recipient?
I've been out of work... delivery person. I've been out of work for 4 months, and... To fill the days, I've done a meals route every.
Yeah, my son used to volunteer with them. That's a great organization. Good on you.
They're the best people.
Yeah.
I just wanted to talk about the craziness that when you were talking about the horse race that is the polling.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of having people in Iowa basically determine who is worthy to get through these primaries is offensive to me, and I just wish more people would go and look into the national primary efforts and give everyone an equal say in who's going to be on the final ballot in the general election. Because by the time it gets to Oregon, you know this from living here, we're down to 2 out of the 17 that were in the last horse race.
Yeah.
And that's just, and if people in Iowa choose a guy like Mike Pence, I fear for this country. He scares me more than almost anyone.
Yeah, because he's a Christian nationalist.
Well, he's a nut job, right? I mean, he won't he won't be in the same room with a woman who's not his wife. How is he going to be president of the United States?
Well, he would surround himself with men.
Yeah, but there's foreign leaders that are women.
Well, he would always have somebody in the room with them. Because he can't control himself, Mike Pence is apparently a raving animal.
Yeah, just the whole idea that people in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina are the gatekeepers for who gets through.
Yeah.
They share nothing of my values that I've ever seen across the board. And they would probably say the same thing about me.
Yeah.
And I wish people would think about a national primary where everyone has the same thing. Maybe split it up into 4 regionals.
The problem with the national primary is that, the whole point of the primaries is to kind of slowly winnow down the field. And so Republicans and Democrats try to choose states that are friendly to the interests that are basically controlling their parties at the time. And those are the biases that you see built into the systems. That's not going to go away. I mean, these parties are first and foremost going to try to protect their own interests and the constituents who are funding those interests or voting for those interests.
And therein lies the problem with our system is that
I agree. But if you had a single national primary, then whoever spent the most money on advertising in the month prior to that primary would probably end up the nominee. And I kind of like the idea of state by state primaries where you actually have a chance for the candidates to hammer out positions. I get it that Iowa doesn't represent the United States, but it does represent the Republican Party. It's mostly white. It's fairly bigoted. I mean, there you go.
I don't care much about corn subsidies.
Yeah.
Right? Oregon doesn't have a lot of corn subsidies.
I get it.
Here.
I totally get it.
If we had four national super primaries split evenly amongst the geographic regions.
That could do it. That's a compromise. I would go for that. John, thank you. Thanks for the call. We'll be back. Stay with us. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag you're it. So why is it that Republicans insist on calling Democrats communists? I mean, this is all over the place. Donald Trump recently said, we're going to deny entry all communists and Marxists. Now, the real problem is what do we do about the ones we already have who happen to be politicians? Nancy Pelosi, Schumer, Shifty Schiff. Ted Cruz told Fox News, Joe Biden has handed the agenda over to the socialists. And not just the socialists, this is now the communists. Today's Democratic Party believes in violence. They believe in mob rule, just like the communists and Marxists. And he goes on. Ron DeSantis, same thing. You see at a college campus, students flying the hammer and sickle from the old Soviet Union flag. There are no communists left in America of any consequence. There's certainly not a single elected communist, but we do have a really serious fascism problem in America. I wrote about this over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Why American Fascists Label All Who Oppose Them as Communists. Check it out. "52 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Johan in Los Angeles. Hey, Johan, what's up?
I watched the Hutchinson interview last night with CNN and NBC and all. Isn't it hypocritical, like her and then other former Trump staff members still vote for Trump?
Yeah.
After all this.
Oh yeah, and she's saying I'm still a Republican and I still believe in this stuff, and she was there for them through multiple crimes, through tearing children from their families. I mean, just horrible things that the Trump administration did. That fine with Cassidy Hutchinson. I get it. She did the right thing with the January 6th committee, and she's turned this into a book deal, and she's getting a lot of publicity. But I don't see her as a hero.
Even Bill Barr.
Yeah.
Even Bill Barr, he believes if he tell it's not right, all that, and then still vote for him, will change Trump, which is nonsense.
Yeah, no, it's the same thing with Liz Cheney. I mean, the Democrats are lionizing Liz Cheney, and Liz Cheney is an anti-abortion right-wing crank, who never saw a military budget she didn't like, and fully supported the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and wants more tax cuts for billionaires. These people are Republicans. It doesn't, because they told the truth in one instance out of multiple opportunities to tell the truth on their own party that they didn't take, in my opinion, does not make them heroes. And I think it's rather sad that they're being lionized, particularly over on MSNBC. Well said, Johan. Thank you. Tim in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hey, Tom. I just was calling in because you were talking about the books, and I actually made national news for lobbying my school to remove a book and to change their school policy. In the process, I was banned. I sued them in federal court and won. The book was called Blankets. So I wanted to call because there is a dividing line, I think, with what's inappropriate or appropriate at school. And when I heard you talk about the Florida thing, I find that disgusting.
So what was your objection to Blankets? I'm unfamiliar with this book.
Well, and I don't know what I can say on your air, but it's literally things that I couldn't. Right, exactly. And the pictures that were in this were disgusting.
Okay.
And it surprised me because I'm a Democrat, and I always thought the Republicans I'd see go into the school board meetings were like just crazy. But then I saw the book myself, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
So then, they removed it, but then while I was trying to get them to change the policy, they then banned me. So I just wanted your audience to know that there are some people who are being reasonable in the approach, because the only issue I had was the graphic images of, sexual stuff.
Yeah.
And not even like innuendo, but actual sexual stuff.
I get it. There are certainly some books that, should not be in the hands of children. And, if you identified one appropriately, good on you. But to say that any book that has any gay character in it should be banned is that's absurd. Tim, thank you for the call. Robert in New York City. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hi, Mr. Hartmann. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call.
Certainly.
My question is regarding Medicare Part D premiums. Now, I understood from the Inflation Reduction Act that there's supposedly a ceiling of a 6% increased premium going forward into 2024. But I found that this is not the case, and other people I've spoken to have found similar things. Case in point, my Part D.
So we're talking D like dog, not B like boy.
That's right, D as in dog. Exactly. Now, in my case, the premium is slated to go up in the order of 75%.
Whoa.
I know of other plans which go up more. Just to round off the figures, I'm currently paying $41 and change, and going forward to next year, the same plan with a somewhat higher deductible, mind you, almost $74.
Wow. I didn't know that those plans were regulated with regard to price. I thought it was, a competitive marketplace that was supposed to provide the price regulation.
Well, again, I could be open to a correction, but it was my understanding that, again, under
I think
the
that 6% cap was on A and B.
Is that right?
Which is the doctors and hospitals. But I'm no expert on this. I mean, the socialsecurityworks.org is the place to go for all that kind of information. I'm sorry I don't have an easy answer for you, but I don't recall ever hearing that Part D, as in dog, was price regulated. So, it's a bummer, Robert, but it's there it is. Robert, thanks for the call. We'll be back on the other side of this break with my friend and colleague, Dean Obeidallah. So stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink by Thom Hartmann. And this is from Chapter 2, The Economy. The epigraph Woody Guthrie's saying, some men rob you with a 6-gun, others fountain pen. The title, the opening part of this chapter, The Coup of the Elite. The election of 1992 pitted Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush. While Bush was running as a conservative who was compassionate enough to hope for 1,000 points of privatized non-governmental light, Clinton campaigned as an unabashed FDR, believing in government as a solution liberal. In language reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Square Deal and FDR's Progressive New Deal, Clinton proposed a new covenant between the U.S. government and U.S. citizens. In a speech at Georgetown University on October 23, 1991, he declared, "We've got to rebuild our political life before the demagogues and the racists and those who pander to the worst in us bring this country down. People once looked at the president and the Congress to bring us together, to solve problems, to make progress. Now, in the face of massive challenges, our government stands discredited, our people are disillusioned. There's a hole in our politics where our sense of common purpose used to be. To turn America around, we've got to have a new approach, founded on our most sacred principles as a nation, with a vision for the future. We need a new covenant, a solemn agreement between the people and their government to provide opportunity for everybody, inspire responsibility throughout our society, and restore a sense of community to our great nation. A new covenant to take government back from the powerful interests in the bureaucracy and give it back to the ordinary people of our country." More than 200 years ago, our founding fathers outlined our first social compact between government and the people, not just between lords and kings. More than 100 years ago, Abraham Lincoln gave his life to maintain the union that compact created. More than 60 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt renewed that promise with a New Deal that offered opportunity in return for hard work. Today, we need to forge a new covenant that will repair the damaged bond between the people and their government, restore our basic values, embed the idea that a country has the responsibility to help people get ahead, but that the citizens have not only the right, but the responsibility to rise as far and fast as their talents and determination can take them. And most important of all, that we're all in this together. We have to make good on the words of Thomas Jefferson, who once said, "A debt of service is due from every man to his country, proportional to the bounties which nature and fortune have measured to him." End of quote from Bill Clinton. Americans loved it. A majority of voters in 1992 were old enough to remember what America was like under the 1940 to 1981 New Deal era, when a single worker with a good job had health care, a pension, and could raise a family and buy a home. When the GI Bill educated millions, when hospitals and health insurance companies in nearly every state were required by law to be not-for-profit corporations, and health care was inexpensive and widely available. And they noticed that the 12 years of Reagan and Bush had begun the process of shattering that historic era, that the middle class was slipping away, the government had become remote and hostile rather than protecting the rights of workers and the middle class. Americans elected Clinton based on his FDR-style rhetoric. They were looking forward to a return to the golden age of America's middle class. They were ready for the new covenant, and apparently so was Bill Clinton. There is every sign that he actually believed his own rhetoric. On all this, he won the election in November and spent that month and December preparing his new covenant programs to restore the American middle class. Until January. As Adam Curtis brilliantly points out in a special documentary series he did for the BBC titled The Trap, a few weeks before Bill Clinton was to be sworn into office as President of the United States, he was visited by Goldman Sachs CEO Robert Rubin, who had just taken a $40 million paycheck for his last year with Goldman and would soon become the head of Clinton's economic team tasked with carrying out the new covenant, and with Alan Greenspan. Rubin and Greenspan sat the young new president down and told him the facts of life as they saw them. Clinton would not govern as an FDR liberal. Instead, he must cut government, promote free trade, and reduce regulation of business. Clinton complied and has been richly rewarded. In his second inaugural address, he declared, "The era of big government is over." The philosophy represented by Rubin and Greenspan doesn't believe in government as a solution to much of anything other than wars and crime. As true classical conservatives in the mold of Sir Edmund Burke and Thomas Hobbes, many modern libertarians and neoliberals don't even believe in democracy. As any libertarian will honestly admit, they call it the tyranny of the majority, or mob rule. Instead, because they believe in the inherently evil nature of most humans, they held that a small ruling elite of good people, the wise ones,
must concentrate wealth and power, the first fuels the second by and large, in a small number of hands, out of the reach of what the first American conservative president John Adams called the rabble, us. They believe that social stability was more important than social mobility. As of this writing, the surest way to become wealthy in the United States or Britain is to be born to wealthy parents. The surest way to be poor is to be born to poor parents. Social mobility, the ability to move between classes for better or worse, has been rolled back from its highly fluid levels in the 1940 to 1980 years to a rigidity last measured in the 1920s as America was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. Conservatives, since Sir Edmund Burke's opposition to the Revolutionary War of 1776 to today's opponents of labor rights, believe that too much power and wealth in the hands of the middle class will inevitably lead to instability. The book, Threshold, The Progressive Plan to Take America Back from the Brink.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is our old buddy and my colleague here on Sirius XM Channel 127 Progress, Dean Obeidallah. The Dean Obeidallah Show runs from 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Sirius XM 127. He's a columnist with CNN. He's a contributor to the New Republic. His Substack newsletter is The Dean's Report. Just go to Substack.com and type in Dean's Report. It'll pop right up. You don't need to know how to spell his last name, which is a challenge for many of us. Dean, welcome back to the program. And Dean Obeidallah and on Twitter, and deanofradio.com on the internet as well. Dean, welcome back to the program. Thank you. You've been hitting it out of the park with your Dean's Report newsletter over there on Substack. I'm just really impressed. I know a number of people. The last time we talked, or maybe it was the time before, you had published a cut and paste to send to your Secretary of State to get Donald Trump knocked off the rolls. I've had a bunch of people do that and call and thank you for that and all that kind of stuff. Now you're talking about, it's not just Donald Trump. The Republican Party for years and years and years has been supporting criminals. And for some reason, this label of the GOP as essentially the criminal party has never stuck. First of all, let's just go through some of the criminals that the Republican Party has promoted over the years. And then secondly, I want to get into this question of why is it that the Democrats aren't using this against them, and why is it that the media never talks about this? So let's start at the beginning. Who are these people?
Well, there are many. I mean, obviously, first of all, we're living through Donald Trump getting 91 felony charges. The guy is out on bail. Corporate media won't use that term. I am trying to sneak it into an article for CNN where Donald Trump, who's out on bail, is campaigning today. So I'm doing my best to get that. Look, they've rallied around that criminal. But it's not just that. I mean, Ken Paxton in Texas AG has been under indictment for years. And he got his nomination. He won re-election. And that's even not this impeachment stuff. We're talking about securities fraud. When he was in the state legislature, and he was charged there with essentially fraudulently inducing people to invest their life savings in scams. And they're still for years.
But wasn't he just acquitted for that, Dean?
No, that was different. That criminal indictment is still hanging over his head. The longest delay in the history of indictment to trial I've ever seen in my entire life. Wow. So, I mean, that's part of the games going on there. Yeah. So you've got that. You had others, lesser and well-known people at times. I put in my article about Duncan Hunter and Chris Collins, two members of Congress, Republicans, early Trump endorsers, both indicted by Trump's own DOJ just months before the election in 2020. And they won re-election in Republican districts. They didn't care. Ultimately, both pled guilty to their charges. And Donald Trump ends up pardoning them when he's leaving office, because that's what you do in your GOP. You clean up all the criminals who supported you from the beginning. And that's what he did with his pardon of Duncan Hunter and Chris Collins, who, again, they pled guilty of their own free will because they were caught. One was securities fraud with Chris Collins, and Duncan Hunter was just spending campaign donations on going on vacations and on watches and everything else, pled guilty. And Trump, like the criminal boss that he is, if you're on his team, he takes care of you.
He pardoned both of them.
He did. He pardoned both. And it's a little fanfare.
Yeah.
It should make your blood boil when you read about it, because they did plead guilty. And at first, when they were charged, they did a very Trumpian thing, saying it's witch hunt, all that stuff. And Chris Collins actually said he was not going to run for re-election and changed his mind and ran, and he won. Because he knew in a red district, as long as you're pro-Trump, you can get away with literally crimes, literally attempting a coup.
Because Trump does it. Yeah.
Of course. I mean, and look at the fraud case today. By the way, I read the decision. I have to tell you about one thing that people are missing. You want me to share with it?
Yeah, please, please. We discussed this briefly on your program last night, and I was very grateful for your helping me to understand it. I recited that to my listeners this morning in the first hour. So go for it. What did we miss?
Well, I just read the decision. We talked a little bit yesterday. I had not read it. There was one of his defenses where he said, okay, the value of what I'm saying in these documents is wrong, but the future value is going to be huge. And you know how he defended that? Under oath in his deposition. The judge cites it. He said that the numbers can be inflated because he could find, quote, a buyer from Saudi Arabia to pay any price he wanted.
I cited that in the first hour today. And the judge said, in response to that, this suggests that he's engaging in influence buying rather than wise investing, or words to that effect.
And also, you mentioned yesterday, we talked about the idea, if there's no victim per se, like the banks didn't lose money,
right?
What do people say to that? Because that was Trump's defense. And the judge does a great job making a distinction between restitution and disgorgement. Restitution is compensation to you as a victim personally, or the bank. Disgorgement is like a criminal penalty in that the goal is to take away ill-gotten gains from someone who violated the law to get them to deter others and deter Trump. And that's what the judge is saying. It doesn't matter. Like, yes, the banks lost money on risk assessment. There are different ways of quantifying. The judge makes a great point in citing black letter law and why disgorgement is needed here. And the goal is to deter Trump and others, because if Trump suffers no penalty, then why can't we all just fraudulently put any document, any number we want for any application for a loan to get lower interest rates on it? Because we have so many, our value of our collateral is so huge that we're not a risk anymore. You know, why can't we lower the value of things for lower insurance premiums? You can't do that. So why Trump is not charged criminally is probably the biggest question everyone's going to have. I don't have the answer to that. Because when you read this, it is fraud. It is absolutely fraud. And that's what the judge said. The judge even had a line where he said that Trump wants them not, quote, the court should not believe its own eyes. Yeah. That's what he wrought.
Yeah,
that's
quoted,
remarkable.
He quoted the Marx Brothers from Duck Soup. He said, you know, are you going to believe me or your lying eyes? I mean, that was literally, you know, Groucho's line.
So remarkable stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, this is part and parcel. Will Trump go down in approval among the GOP base, even though he has now been adjudicated as a matter of law of committing massive fraud in numerous instances? The judge goes through a lot of details. No, nothing, because the GOP doesn't care about criminality. They only care about putting black and brown people in jail. That's what law and order means. Black and brown people go to jail. If you're white and you're on our team, you're free to do whatever you want.
Right, and
we're going to get your back.
Pardoned. And get
yeah,
pardoned.
that's it. I mean, that's what we're living
so Dean,
through.
one other quick question about that, and then I want to move on to some of the other stuff I see over at the Dean's report. My understanding is that the judge granted the summary judgment on the first of 9 counts that have been brought against Trump and his organization by Letitia James. The other 8 counts, if I'm remembering the number right, are still out there. They're still waiting for court resolution. Is that correct?
There are other counts still outstanding, but the key thing, and we talked about it last night, there's 2 parts of this case. It kind of mirrors a civil lawsuit, liability and damages. So now on liability, it's been adjudicated by the judge as a matter of law. There's no question of fact that Donald Trump committed fraud. The other counts are going to go to the idea of what's the disgorgement. Tish James, the AG, wants $250 million. Also, you're going to have, now he's going to lose control of these companies in New York. And it doesn't mean the business is over. You have his lawyers lying, saying they're nationalizing the company. That's not at all true. It will go. He still owns it. He gets all the benefits of it. He just can't run it, nor can his kids. So both sides have to submit names within 10 years to run it, and the judge is going to pick someone. But next week, the damage part of the trial begins, and there's no jury. It's just a judge trial. It's this judge again looking at the damages. So we'll see how it plays out, if it starts on Monday or not.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Over on Dean's report, DeanObeidallah.substack.com, you just plug into a search engine, Dean's report and Substack, and it'll pop right up. In fact, it was the very first thing that I got when I did that. Your most recent piece, and you've done the homework, the research for this, and I'd love you to just share a little bit of it with my listeners in the 2 minutes or so I think we've got left before we hit a hard break. Yeah, it's titled, Trump Wants You to Forget That He Was the Most Anti-Union President Ever. He's going tonight to Michigan to make a pitch at a non-union auto manufacturing site. Tell us about Trump's anti-union record.
And in my article, I detail what the AFL-CIO and other unions said in 2016 about Trump. They called him a charlatan. Unstable charlatan was the head of the AFL-CIO. And they went through and detailed the IBEW, and I put in my article about when he had a chance to pick union or non-union workers for his projects, he said he would always pick non-union. That he would screw over workers for years, union or not workers. So he was anti-union. Then when he came in, he appointed people to the National Labor Relations Board who were anti-union, so it hurt the ability to unionize, it hurt union workers, appointed judges who were anti-union, signed executive orders that weaken unions, weaken the ability for
And let's not forget about Anthony Scalia.
Right, and you had Andy Scalia there, so you've got everything he did was anti-union the entire time. That's why the explosion now under Biden, you have a leader like Biden who's pro-union, and we're seeing record numbers of people approving of unions and the strikers, and that's why Trump's going. He's going because they're more popular than him, and he wants to suck up the popular people, and he's going to a non-union place. He didn't, as Sean Fain, the head of UAW, said, they were on strike in 2019 for 60 days outside of GM. Did Donald Trump show up once? Never. He didn't care about them. Now they're popular. He sees the approval pay. That's why he's going now. He cares about one person, Donald Trump. And again, so Trump out on bail is traveling to Michigan today, just to sum it up properly.
Yeah. And again, back in 2016, Donald Trump came out and said that if you're going to go on strike against the auto companies, you should be fired, number one. And number two, that UAW workers were making too much money, he said in 2016.
And he slammed the union in 2008 when there was the bailout that they needed, or during the Obama administration, maybe it was 2010. And he blamed the unions for driving up the cost of things, and that was their fault. Yeah. He's always been pro-corporation, anti-worker. That's who he is.
Well, he's a billionaire. I mean, what do you expect? Wow. This is so how is this going to be? How are the low-information voters, the Fox News watchers among the auto workers? It looks to me like they're going to swallow this thing hook, line, and sinker.
Some will, but then again, Biden wins the union households in 2020 by 16 points, better than Hillary Clinton, who only got 9 points. So we're back to normal. So there's still going to be about 40% of union households supporting Donald Trump, regardless. So that's we just need to keep those same margins because you need them in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. These are key constituent groups there. And right now it looks good for President Biden on that. We're a long way from the election, but President Biden truly is the most pro-union president since FDR. So in our lifetimes, unless you're amazingly old and still alive, God bless you. But for the rest of us, he is the most pro-union president. And it's not just words. I mean, he has supported union organizing. He invited Amazon and Starbucks union organizers to the White House. When he was campaigning in 2019, he bragged about being union from the pro-union since the 1970s. Yep. So it's not a photo op. This is who he is. This is his DNA.
I'm with you. The great Dean Obeidallah. You can listen to him on Sirius XM 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Sirius Progress Channel 127. Dean, thanks for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom.
And check out his newsletter, The Dean's Report, over on Substack.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day. Black voters have a win in Alabama, and your calls on the other side of this. Stay with us. And welcome back. Joan in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, I was thinking about the comments you had made about Saudi Arabia buying an oil company here in this country. Mm-hmm. And I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, back in 1968 when we met with some friends, and he was a big guy in business in the state of Wisconsin. And he said that the subject came up, and he said that foreign countries at that time were not allowed to buy and own big businesses and so forth in this country, that it was against the law for them to do that. and nothing really changed until I don't know when it starts changing. But that's my main concern, is what's going to be left for the American people when they're being brought up by foreign entities, who soon will be running everything if we're not careful. And I think it's gotten kind of out of hand, and I don't know what can be done about it, but it's a little bit scary. What's your recollection of how things used to be with that, whether or not we could sell property to foreign countries?
Yeah, I don't know that there was ever any federal prohibition on it. There might have been some state laws, but you know, if anybody is a scholar of this stuff, call in and inform us. I don't have a specific answer, Joan. I just don't know. But I do agree with you that, you know, we need to do what many other foreign countries have done, what I believe Canada does, and put some very specific limits on foreign entities owning businesses in the United States and owning real estate in the United States.
Now, especially the businesses, and this man was a big enough man I was pretty sure knew what he was talking about.
Yeah.
But I don't like to comment and make sure, take that for granted unless I hear it from somebody like you or somebody that looks into it and reports back.
Well, you've got car manufacturers that have built, you know, car manufacturing facilities in the United States, particularly in the South, where you've got no unions. And that's been going on for the better part of 30 or 40 years. I mean, if there was a change, it seems that it probably would have happened in the 80s under Reagan. But like I said, I don't recall the specifics.
Yeah, I can see with the cars, they kind of swap and do business with each other to help make their products right. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that it constitutes, you know, owning every single thing about it. And with the way with Saudi Arabia, the money they have, what the damage they can do buying up, you know, whatever.
Yeah, well, like I said, they own the largest gasoline refinery in the United States. That's huge.
And that is the biggest threat to the guy in the street that has to drive his car every day. And a friend of mine just filled up her car, and she's a retired lady, and it cost her $68 to fill up her automobile. And you know, that's a travesty in this country. And I hope it goes. I might be old-fashioned, but I hope it goes back about 40 years or 50 years and give us a little bit of.
I'm with you. And we need to ban the export of crude oil products. We need to, you know, in my opinion, we need to nationalize the oil companies or buy the oil companies.
We should use our own oil. What are we doing?
No, we're letting fossil fuel billionaires sell our oil overseas and then jack up the prices to us on our own oil. With you, Joan. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV, Joan. We'll be back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Stay with us. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. You know, between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, you know, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, you know, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. It's 24 minutes past the hour. And major win for black voters. The Supreme Court had earlier, last year, had ordered Alabama to draw their maps so that there were at least 2 majority black districts. And the white power structure in Alabama said, nope, ain't going to do it, and defied the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court yesterday said, yes, you are going to do it. So we'll see if they comply. I'm skeptical, but we'll see if they comply. If they do, and they do put together the map that the court is requiring, and a black Democrat flips the 2nd Alabama district, then Alabama will end up, for the first time in its history, with 2 black members of Congress, of the House of Representatives. This would also mark the first time since the 1960s that a Democrat has represented a district covering part of the Mobile, Alabama area. So, keep your eye on this. These kind of gerrymandering cases are happening all over the country. It's happening in Ohio. It's happening in Wisconsin and Michigan. We're seeing case after case where the Republicans have so rigorously gerrymandered states that in states with roughly 50-50 voting, you end up with 70-30 or 60-40 representation, tilted toward the GOP, which is not a good thing. By the way, Louise and I got our COVID shots yesterday afternoon. We made an appointment with our pharmacy and online. It was very easy. I did that last Friday, and the earliest date that they had available was yesterday afternoon. And then just before I went on Dean's show, in fact, last night, we went over to the pharmacy and rolled up our sleeves and got our shots. And here it is now, almost 24 hours later. And I have a sore arm, but other than that, no problem, no side effects. Louise hasn't had any side effects either. She got 2 weeks ago, I got my RSV shot, and she got her second shingle shot. And that knocked her down. She had a 103-degree fever from the shingle shot. But this booster, this COVID booster, and it's been 5 months. We got the last one in May. This COVID booster seems to be, at least for those of us who have been, vaccinated at every opportunity, seems to be pretty mild. So it might, I can't give you medical advice, but I can tell you, based on my experience, I would not be afraid to take this shot. In fact, I would leap at it. And you don't have to be over 65 to get this shot. Everybody over 5 or 6 years old is eligible for it. So I would, and it does have the new Omicron variant in it. So, it's not dealing with the most recent mutations, but it's dealing with the parent of the most recent mutations, which is an important thing. So check it out. Get your shots, right? Stay healthy. Stay safe. I'll be back with your calls on the other side of the break. What's on your mind today?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations and the GOP would really rather you didn't know. I'll be right back with your calls on the other side of this program.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Minority Leader, How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change by Stacey Abrams. This is from Chapter 1, although the introduction is fascinating too, where she talks about, Rhodes scholarships and stuff, but this is Chapter 1. I sit in the living room, a cozy space, warm in the early summer. I'm perched on the edge of a sofa next to Valerie, the home's owner, a lovely black woman in her late 40s. Across from us, seated close together on a wide settee met for one, are her 2 children, a son and a daughter. Politicians rarely visit their streets, which are nestled in a poorer community in South Georgia. Valerie beams with pride that both her children are headed to college in the fall. David, 17, plans to study criminology. Maya, 18, her belly round with her first child, intends to become a middle school teacher. Both newly graduated from high school, Maya will give birth in mere weeks and begin college months later, an unwed teen mother. Her intended school is more than 3 hours north of her home, so her mother will raise her newborn baby while she starts her freshman year. Valerie speaks matter-of-factly about the coming challenge, raising a new child just as hers leaves the nest. Still, she is determined that both her children pursue college degrees that she never received. Maya, the mother-to-be, wonders how she'll do so far away from home and her baby. Yet in the next breath, she explains how college will be the best for her and her child. Their future success rests upon her. I've come to their home as part of my campaign for governor, so I asked Valerie what she expects of someone like me. What can I do to help make lives like hers better? In her soft voice, she replies, she just wants options for financial aid for her children. They will succeed, she says, if they can afford to stay in school. As I look around the modest home passed down through the generations, I understand both the pride and the desperation tangled in her response. She got them through and has given them the tools to carve out better lives for themselves. We chat more about the worries she has lived with all those years, our discussion turning to the crime and poverty in their neighborhood. Then I ask Valerie what she wants. At first, all I get in response is a quizzical look to suggest I need to reconsider my bid for higher office. Or that suggests. I repeat, what do you want for you? What secret dream do you have for yourself? Her confused expression turns to one of surprise. I don't know, she tells me. I've been a cashier at the Piggly Wiggly for 20 years. You must want something, I probe, something you'd like to do for you? A daycare, she admits quietly. I'd like to start a daycare center for unwed mothers like my daughter, so more girls can finish school and pursue their dreams. But that ambition is beyond her. Her body language, her tone of voice, her averted gaze speak louder than her words. I press her, but she demurs with a smile. Let's just see what happens if you win the governor's job, she says. Valerie's house in South Georgia is not too different from the squat red brick house where I grew up on South Street in Gulfport, Mississippi. An oak tree grew out in our front yard, shadowing the front sidewalk, forbidding grass to grow beneath its shade. Pink azaleas bloomed each spring from bushes that flanked the front door. Our rented house and the other set close by teemed with children, all black, all working class. We played in our postage-stamped yards, make believing the fantastical, superhero exploits, cops and robbers. As we got older, we'd talk about moving to New Orleans or living in one of the mansions along the beachfront that lay less than 5 miles away, across the railroad tracks that ran in between our neighborhood and the more wealthy environs. We dreamed of more, while our parents' lives centered around survival and making it from paycheck to paycheck. Instinctively, we understood that more had to be possible, even if we didn't know what to do to get there. These imaginings, these desires, are the roots of ambition. As adults, like Valerie, we tend to edit our desires until they fit our construction of who we're supposed to become. In such a world, I wouldn't dare dream of running for higher office, for mayor or governor or president. At least for now, Valerie sees herself retiring in 20 more years from Piggly Wiggly as a cashier, rather than as a small business owner who helps the community raise its children. From our brief meeting, I could see she had the fire, albeit of a low burn, of a minority leader. She had ambition, she had vision, but she didn't have the faith, and understandably so. Whether we come from working class neighborhoods or grow up comfortably middle class, minorities rarely come of age explicitly thinking about what we want and how to get it. People already in power almost never have to think about whether they belong in the room, much less if they would be listened to once outside. These men, and they are usually men and typically white, do not have to grapple with low expectations based on gender or race or class. Ambition for them begins with reminiscences of old times and older friendships or newer alliances. The ends have already been decided. Only the means are to be discussed. Most potential minority leaders feel the same lack of faith Valerie had, at least at some point in their evolution. We may not know how to get the first job, let alone make it to the big chair. We don't know how to take the leap from accepting our fates to actually changing them, and not just a little, but radically. Then there are those who simply don't know what they want. The drive to achieve burns inside, often without a clear target. We want to be something, but what that is remains hazy. Often we cannot articulate our goals because they lie just beyond the reach of who we're supposed to be. Ambition's scale is irrelevant. What holds us back is not scope, it's fear. And because we don't know what to call our dreams, don't know how to make them happen, or are pretty sure we'll be disappointed, we just stand still. But becoming a minority leader demands that we embrace ambition as our due. Stacey Abrams.
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. You know, back in the day, the Republicans had these kind of soft, big lies. Ronald Reagan telling us that if we just cut taxes on billionaires, it'll trickle down to all the rest of us. And Climate change isn't caused by fossil fuels, of course. Voter fraud is caused by black people, and gays and lesbians and trans people want to convert your children. All these lies. Public school teachers are communists. They really are not working. So now the Republicans have a new strategy because their lies are not working, including their lies about COVID and about Russia and about the media and everything in public schools, abortion. Because their lies aren't working, they're actually going after university-level researchers who look into how lies are created and propagated across social media and in the media and in politics. It's an amazing story, reported by both the Washington Post and the New York Times. I got a whole rant about it over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour, and Kevin McCarthy looks like he's hell-bent for leather to shut down the government on behalf of the right-wing crazies. There's a report out this morning that the longer the shutdown lasts, the more likely it is to push the United States into a recession. I have been telling you for months now that this is coming, that this is the Republican plan, that it's not just shutting down the government. They want a recession, because they know that the American public will blame it on Joe Biden. This is what they want going into the election. They're going to do as much damage to the economy as they can. And the proof? Over at the Senate side with Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell, they got together and they got 77, as I recall, 77 senators, Republicans and Democrats, to last night vote. Now, this was a test vote, but the real one is coming today. 77 Republican and Democratic senators voted, out of 100, voted to send a bipartisan piece of legislation to the House that would keep the government open. And Kevin McCarthy this morning said, I don't see the support in the House for that legislation. In other words, he's going to shut down the government, even though the Senate just threw him a lifeline. This is how just sick and twisted and bizarre it all is. By the way, our fundraiser for Joyce, our former false call screener, is rolling along. You can see it over at GoFundMe.com and just type in Joyce's name, Joyce Nance, N-A-N-C-E, Joyce Nance, and you'll find it. And thanks to the folks who have already gone over there and put in some money for Joyce's expenses. Having cancer, particularly metastatic lung cancer, is not only difficult and painful and scary as hell, but it's also very expensive. All right, let's pick up your phone calls here. Bob in San Jose, California. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Well, you were talking about net neutrality earlier, and I'm talking to you on a old-fashioned phone with a landline. So I'm talking to you by way of a common carrier. And that is a neutral system.
That's right.
Where
your phone company cannot listen into your phone conversations.
Technically, yes, they could. I guess they could eavesdrop, but what they can do with it is right. Another.
Well, they would have to have a warrant to do it. Legally.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. Now with a cell phone, they say I think the horses have left the barn already. With a cell phone, yes, the radio signal through 4G or 5G is potentially through a common carrier. Verizon and all the other companies are, I believe, common carriers in that respect. But the phone itself has applications in it. I refuse to call them apps. That was Steve Jobs too lazy to say the whole word. But anyway, applications can intercept your speech and your texts, whatever, going in both directions, and analyze them and send things out to whoever. So there could be half a dozen little brothers as well as a big brother in your phone, in your cell phone, listening to you and parsing what you're saying.
Not only that,
money out of it.
Not only that, VoIP phones are not considered common carrier, voice over internet protocol. And if you look at the settings on your phone, you will see one that says allow calls on Wi-Fi. And if that's turned on, and I believe that's the default on most operating systems, if that's turned on, then whenever you're within range of a Wi-Fi system that your phone can detect, your telephone calls are not going through your telephone company. I mean, technically they are, but they're going over the internet first, and your internet service provider, which is your phone company, if you're not on a Wi-Fi, and whatever your internet service provider is on Wi-Fi can listen to your phone calls and use that data any way they want.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, there's a reason why they want to do that. As they're increasing the number of cells in order to accommodate more and more people, they're lowering the antennas closer and closer to the ground and reducing the signal power. So the cells are getting smaller and smaller. And the ability of the radio signal from the cell tower to penetrate into a housing situation is getting more and more difficult. So they really want to switch to a network that's accessible. And in this case, when you go from outside to inside in your house,
it's your Wi-Fi
very
network.
likely you lose the cell network, but you pick up the Wi-Fi network.
Yep.
And your phone is in fact set to grab a Wi-Fi network if it's available.
Yep.
So automatically you become part of that voice over IP thing. But I'm saying these are even ahead of that. Is the digitized voice going from the microphone out, and the digitized audio going the other way to your ear can be analyzed by the applications living in that cell phone.
Do you know the names of any apps that specifically can listen in on your phone conversations?
I'm not sure. I suspect that Google has some of those. I'm not positive about that. But I have heard people who say they were talking on their phone about something, and a day later we're seeing ads.
Oh, Louise and I have had that happen several times. Whether it's coincidence or whether it's
that happened. Somebody parsed your words, found keywords in there, and said, "Oh, they're interested in this.
Correct.
Let's show them ads."
Yep. Yep. I've seen it.
That's going on.
I think it is too, Bob. Bob, thanks a lot for the call. I was getting a weird echo there. Steve in Park Ridge, Illinois. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, good to talk to you. I've been a follower of yours for well over 10 years.
Thank you, Steve.
And I even had the pleasure of meeting you at the Kane County Democrats meeting 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know if you recall that, but good. In any event, I rarely, if ever, disagree with you, but I do want to offer a nuance to some of your comments regarding Cassidy Hutchinson that you made earlier today, and that being, my wife Vicki and I watched the 3 interviews yesterday that she gave, one on The View, one with Rachel, one with Lawrence, and there's a very important theme that I think we need to not lose sight of, which comes through in and around all the noise of Rudy groping her, dating Matt Gaetz, et cetera. Yeah. And she has been consistent to say that we cannot, as a country, allow Trump a second term or all bets are off. And I want to applaud this young woman, mid-20s. I'll be 74 next week. And I don't know if I would have had the courage at the age I am now or 50 years back to be such a poised beacon, clarion call of this is very, very dangerous to allow this man a second term or all bets are off. And I think for that, she should be listened to and somewhat applauded. What do you think?
I agree. But the caveat is that she's still a Republican, and she still supports the things that Donald Trump did in office. Or at least many of them, if not most of them, outside of trying to overthrow the government. And we can't forget that. You see people trying to lionize her and Liz Cheney and others. And I just, I get it. It takes courage to be in the Republican Party these days and to stand up and take on Donald Trump. But it shouldn't, that should be the norm in America. That shouldn't be the outlier. I guess it's more disappointing than anything else.
I do think that, unfortunately, I agree with you. It should be the norm, but it's not. Right. Therefore, with all of the misgivings in policy, at least we have a Liz Cheney, a Cassidy, et cetera, that will speak against him in any event.
Yeah, no, it's a start. It's a start. And I think the Republican Party is going to gradually recover what little of their sanity they ever had. Steve, thanks for the call. We'll see, right? We'll see. And in fact, the big question about tonight's debate is going to be how many of those people on that stage are going to take on Donald Trump head on. I'm betting not more than 2.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
That would probably be a safe drinking game if you don't want to get too drunk. Take a drink every time somebody criticizes Trump. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Joe in North Bramford, Connecticut. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom?
I'm fine.
Great afternoon.
Thank you.
Yes, Grandma Hillary told us all about what was going to happen.
She did. She truly did.
Right on stage, right there for everybody to see. Putin's puppet.
Yep.
Here's another thing I got, Tom. Biden's poll numbers. I don't trust them.
I don't either.
I think corporate America knows that Joe Biden, Union Joe, is coming after their golden parachutes. And they know it, and they're going to try anything they can to do Joe Biden in.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, there's a lot of CEOs in this country who hate Joe Biden and hate Democrats, hate unions. You know, all that sort of thing. And so it wouldn't surprise me if even some of the large media companies were intentionally putting their thumb on the scale for Republicans. I mean, I think that's been going on forever. I remember during the George W. Bush administration, I started my program in 2003 during the Bush administration. And every Sunday on all of the Sunday shows, you would get a majority Republicans, like 60, 70% Republicans. And when Media Matters went to them and asked them on the record, these networks, why mostly Republicans, their response was, well, you've got a Republican president, the Republicans are in power, people want to hear from the people in power, so of course we're going to have more Republicans. And everybody kind of nodded their head and said, oh, yeah, okay, I guess that makes a certain amount of sense. And then Obama became president for 8 years. And during those 8 years of Obama's president, it was always a majority Republicans on the Sunday shows. And so finally somebody from, I believe it was Media Matters, went to the networks and said, why a majority Republicans? And their answer was, well, the Republicans are out of power right now and people want to hear from the opposition. So it's like, you know, heads I win, tails you lose. The media has a clear Republican bias. They have had it for years and years and years. They started promulgating this myth in the 90s. Rush Limbaugh was the biggest proponent of it, that there's a liberal bias in the media. The closest they can get to that is that most journalists actually went to college, and college graduates are more likely to be Democrats. But, you know, that doesn't mean that their reporting is skewed toward the Democratic Party. And if anything, I'd say it's the opposite. So I'm with you, Joe. This you know,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to just say their style is to say the lie 100 times to get it in the ecosystem, and then people start believing it.
Yeah.
I mean, lightweight voters start believing it.
Yep. Yeah, no, this is what Goebbels laid out, was, you know, the big lie strategy. You tell a lie that's big enough and repeat it over, as Franklin Roosevelt pointed out. Repeat it over and over and over again, and eventually people will come to believe it. And in fact, you want to tell a lie that is so outrageous that people figure, oh, well, it must be the truth. I mean, who would say that, right? And you know, like, for example, the election was stolen from Donald Trump. You know, we've never had a president in the history of the United States say something like that. And you know, it takes a professional liar, a professional con man, a professional fraudster to do it. Joe, thanks for the call. Well said. It's 48 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds here on the Thom Hartmann Program, picking up your calls. And the place where despair is not an option. So please stay tuned. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Are you feeling exhausted by Donald Trump? So many Americans are. And not Donald Trump, not just Donald Trump. The entire GOP. We've got this war on trans people. We've got a war on queer people. We've got a war on people of color, a war on voting, young people concerned about climate change, and Republicans not only refusing to do anything about it, but like Marjorie Taylor Greene out there talking about how, oh, well, it's just normal variation, you know, it's nothing to worry about, just keep on shoveling that coal. People cutting pills in half because they can't afford their medicine. Parents who don't have enough money to properly dress their kids for school, even though they're working full-time. Seniors fearing that the Republican Party is going to finally succeed in killing off Social Security and Medicare. They're trying it again. You know, it's this whole, yes, we'll raise the debt ceiling as part of cut Social Security. It's nuts. I got a whole op-ed about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. It's 10 minutes before the hour, picking up your calls. Joseph in Manhattan Beach, California. Hey, Joseph, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom, how are you?
Good. What's up?
I have I've got a friend here in Los Angeles who is a Saudi American, and he's got money, he's got gas stations. And he explained something to me the other day, and it makes too much sense, and I feel like it's about Kushner, and it's about the $2 billion, and it's about the secret documents. The thing is that 6 or 7 months into Trump's administration, suddenly MBS gets all the billionaires. What he told me is that they had been eluding him for years, for 4 or 5, I don't know how long, and that our CIA had tabs on them for our own security reasons. Suddenly, Trump goes there. They do the orb thing. He comes back, and he collected $106 billion. 2% is $2 billion.
Yeah,
it's a fee.
So it's a finder's fee. Yeah, you know, there is virtually no disputing. I mean, there's press reports. There's actually Saudi reports that Mohammed bin Salman, the dictator of Saudi Arabia now, he was not in charge of Saudi Arabia when Trump became president. It was his nephew, or his cousin, MBD, who was the actual son of the king and grandson of the founder of Saudi Arabia, who was next in line. And Jared took the presidential daily brief, which at Donald Trump's request had included a list of the names of all the Saudis who were loyal to MBD versus all the Saudis who were loyal to MBS. Jared apparently took that over to Saudi Arabia and gave it to MBS. MBS then used that list to arrest all the people who were loyal to MBD, hold them in that fancy hotel, and tortured several of them. One of them died from torture, and he took billions of dollars from them. You're right, over $100 billion.
Oh yeah, exactly. And
then he became the dictator of the country. And, you know.
Right. And so don't you think that's what's going on in Ukraine, too? It was somehow going on with Donald Trump. They made this $2 billion there, and there's probably a payment due if he gets back in.
Yeah. You know, I don't understand the Ukraine analogy, but, you know, there clearly was a quid pro quo
It's a way to get, it's a way to get a dictator in power.
Oh, you mean Donald gets some money if he betrays Ukraine from Russia?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
If he takes Ukraine, if he wins the war.
Yeah, I get it.
And with his help.
And you wonder, you know, was it Putin? Putin had over 20 secret conversations with Donald Trump while he was in the White House that we know nothing about, other than the fact that they happened. And was it Putin who told Donald Trump, hey, withhold those missile systems from Ukraine until they come up with some dirt on Biden? I mean, you know, that.
Donald Trump has no political brain.
Yeah.
He just has a business brain.
Well, he's sly, but I get your point, Joseph. Well made. Thank you. Stephen in Wausau, Wisconsin. Hey, Stephen, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call, man. Sure. Hey, I just wanted to comment on the importance of Biden walking the picket line And I wonder, and I loved what he had to say about they're doing well now and you should be doing well now.
Yep.
I was so impressed. But I wondered how many people remembered when Obama was running for his first term and he said to a bunch of union members, when you go out on strike, I'll put my walking shoes on and I'll be out there with you.
I remember him saying that.
I was part of the Wisconsin uprising in 2011, and he ignored it.
Yeah. Well,
he ignored it.
There
so
was,
really
Obama, like Bill Clinton, was a neoliberal, and so they needed the union vote, but their support for the unions was tepid, to say the very least, which is disappointing and sad, but it's the reality. I remember that too, Stephen. Stephen, thanks for the call. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania, but Joe Biden is the real McCoy here. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania, you're on the air. What's up?
Hey, Tom, super quick on hold stuff. Many vibes out to Joyce the Hammer. I'm talking on a 4G flip cell, and I, too, get ads after I've had verbal conversations. I don't do a lot of texting, so it's very real that they are doing it.
Yep.
Number 3, Cassidy Hutchinson. I think your instinct is right there. I think she may be, she's a smart woman, and I think she always had what her moral conscience position was, but she was ready to strike back when she was personally, individually affronted and groped. But the thing I'm calling about is the Trump gun purchase and whether or not that was actually attempted or completed and then reversed, because a simple FBI application would be faxed in. They do it by old-fashioned
I think it's extremely unlikely that Trump actually bought that gun. It would have been a violation of federal law if he did, and I don't think he would. Then they would have had to run a background check, and I just can't imagine him sitting around waiting for it.
That's why the doing it matters. But Hunter Biden's gun issue, prosecutors all over America need to take a look at their gun registry people and cross-reference that.
Yeah, and start nailing some of these people. If they're, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. Eric, I'm with you. Hey, thanks so much thanks Eric for the call. Thank you for being with us today, all these 3 hours. We do appreciate it. We'll be same time, same place. Get your COVID shot out there. I did mine yesterday. It's easy peasy. So anyhow, get out there, get active, tag You're It. We got a lot of work to do before the next election. Have a great afternoon. I'll catch up with you on the other side tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and video media online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant no ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.